why you think there's such resistance, because something I've noticed in the research that I've done is that it's almost like it's a modern phenomena of archaeology, maybe the last 50 years, perhaps even less, that there is such a like a hard line, and it's, as I think, as you mentioned in America before, there's almost a fear in some researchers to challenge some of these paradigms, despite the last 20 years really throwing up just
Well,
tremendous evidence, from not just
yeah,
archaeology but adjacent fields of science, climate history, genetic
yeah,
timelines, things like that.
yeah. I saw a quotation on this. I forget who it was from, which kind of rung a bell. In evolution, when you have a species that occupies a particular ecological niche, it's very difficult for that niche to be filled by anybody else until the former species has gone extinct. Otherwise, it completely occupies that niche and refuses to allow any competitors in. And I think that is where we are with mainstream archaeology and mainstream prehistory. That a niche has been carved out by a group of academics, and they see themselves threatened and challenged by others who are not academics. Actually, none of us really technically are academics, and the main project is to keep us out, and not to have, and that's why it was in a way so sad and so symbolic what happened with Zahi, because there was an opportunity for both sides to have a reasonable and sensible discussion, find out what the points of difference were, find out if there were any points of agreement, and see if we could move forward constructively. And that's what I would love to see happen, but unfortunately it doesn't happen, and we end up with this sort of war of all against all, going on endlessly and achieving absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that's right. It's just sort of spinning our wheels. I mean,
What I'm finding is that I'm getting banned from working on quite a number of archaeological sites around the world, and this is to me a form of, perhaps the worst form of censorship. It, Archaeologists have control of access to archaeological sites, and what a clever way for them to get rid of critics is just to never to allow those critics any access to those sites. Um, uh, it's really not the way things should work. I've come to realize that history and prehistory are really ideological subjects. Well, there's a whole ideology tied up with this, and that ideology dominates the debate.
yeah, it does, and it's a strange thing to me, because it's like I study a lot of figures like Flinders Petrie, and perhaps it's got something to do with the nature of the debate and the rise of the internet. Like as I look at a lot of like historical, previous era, Victorian era explorers and archaeologists and Egyptologists, they seem to be much more willing to acknowledge when there's mystery and when there's things we don't understand, versus today. I mean, I can almost understand it a little bit, given that the debate used to happen in those academic, halls of residence, and with their peers and colleagues, and now it's this wide open field of the internet where anyone, like me, a journalist like you, can come in and sort of have
Yeah.
their say, and get some audience attraction. So to some extent, I can almost understand this, the narrowing of that middle ground, and that area of where the real answer is I don't know and we should do more research, becomes we know what happened, there's no mystery here, the case is closed kind of thing.
Yes, it is. To my mind, it is a most unfortunate thing. Is that part of the mission of mainstream archaeology and prehistory seems to be to drain the past of all its mystery,
Yeah.
to turn it into this sort of bloodless, colorless
Yeah.
entity which has been sucked dry of all its mystery and all its magic, and left as a sort of dull, repetitive, rote academic study. And I think that's really sad, because the engagement of the public with the past depends on mystery, and we can't just have sanctioned mysteries. Mysteries that there are mysteries that are okay according to the mainstream, and other mysteries that aren't okay. And it shouldn't be that case. It's up to us, in the alternative side of this division, to up our game, to do excellent work, to do the best work we can, to research thoroughly. But we would like to have a proper and reasoned discussion with the mainstream about this. And I think I speak not only for myself, but for many of my colleagues in this field. We don't want it to go on being a hate fest.
No.
We would like it to be much more constructive. A man like Zahi Hawass has got a lifetime of experience working on the Giza Plateau.
Yeah.
He's enormously knowledgeable. In many ways, he's a very he's quite a fascinating character. I quite like him, and I was very sad when that happened because I saw that as an opportunity for a new way forward, and instead it ended up in as a complete dead end, which is most unfortunate.
Indeed. Yeah, and the other, to me, it almost, I think this unwillingness to embrace some of that mystery also limits progress because, we tend to, the way I view a lot of mainstream archaeology and Egyptology in particular is this constant desire to look at it through that lens of, it's everything, we have to be able to understand and classify everything that happened in the past from within our own perspective of our own technology, of our own civilization, as some sort of inferior subset of what we know, versus
Yes.
I think there are some true mysteries that if we embrace them and investigated them with an open mind, we might stand to actually learn something and progress our own knowledge base.
Exactly. I mean, one of the ways that the mainstream deals with this, and it's interesting. I don't want to carp on about this too much, but it's interesting the way that mainstream archaeology and prehistory has a grip, for example, on Wikipedia.
Yes.
Now, Wikipedia is the first port of call for almost anybody who's looking for information on a subject they don't know.
Come on.
And for that port of call to be controlled by an ideological faction that have a particular vested interest in a particular view of the past is most unfortunate.
In Egypt.
And yet that is the case.
Ironically,
You find, for example, that
in
Younger
the level
Dryas
called
impact
Egypt.
hypothesis cannot get
Which
a
we're
fair
obsessed
deal
with
on
here.
Wikipedia. They constantly try to diss it and to cut it down. Although that is
How
not
long
the
the internet
role of an
lasts?
encyclopedia. An encyclopedia's role is simply to
I don't know,
report the
man.
facts. And in my case, they try to
Forever.
just write me off at the outset by calling me a pseudo-historian.
Forever
or
in our hearts and
pseudo-archaeologist
minds.
or a pseudo-scientist. And with that word, for a person who's coming to my work for the first time, the first thing they see is Wikipedia. The most likely thing they're going to do is say, well, we're not going to look further into Hancock's work. And that clearly is the objective of the Wikipedia project, of the way that they cover this, is to just get rid of all inquiry right at the outset and stick with the mainstream all the time.
Oh,
and
nice,
yet,
buddy.
As the years have gone by, like I wrote
That's awesome, buddy.
Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995. 26 years ago, more than quarter of a century ago. I published Fingerprints of the Gods. God, it makes me.
I was in high school.
And in Fingerprints of the Gods, I proposed that there had been a giant geological cataclysm somewhere around 12,000 years ago, and that it had wiped out most of the traces of a previously advanced
Oh, nice, dude.
civilization
That's great.
of the Ice Age. And I looked at a number of possibilities for that cataclysm, but the main thing that I wanted to make a point was, if you're going to talk about a lost civilization, you need to talk about a cataclysm as well. Civilizations don't just disappear. Things happen to them. And the interesting thing is that there was no evidence for such a cataclysm when I published Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995. But from 2007 onwards, there has been a massive amount of evidence, and that is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and it's mainstream science. When I report the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, I'm reporting mainstream science. To report mainstream science is not pseudoscience, but nevertheless, that is how it is treated. So, in Fingerprints of the Gods, 1995, I propose a gigantic geological cataclysm around 12,000 years ago. Everybody says this is absolute rubbish. It's total pseudoscience, couldn't happen. Then we find out from 2007 that the episode called the Younger Dryas, whatever caused it, and I'm personally convinced by the comet hypothesis, but there are other possibilities, was truly a global cataclysm with massive sea level rise and huge devastation of wildlife, of the megafauna, and also of human populations. So actually, in proposing a global cataclysm around 12,000 years ago in Fingerprints of the Gods, I wasn't wrong. I turned out to be more or less right. Totally vindicated on the date. There's no recognition of that in the work of those who call me and want to call me a pseudoscientist, and to diminish and minimize more than quarter of a century of my work. Another example is the Great Sphinx in Fingerprints of the Gods. Of course, I'm not the originator of this. John Anthony West and Robert Schock Robert Schoch actually is a scientist. He's a professor of geology at Boston University. John Anthony West, a great friend of mine, the late great John Anthony West, was a sort of rogue scholar who just brought a whole new understanding to Egypt. And it was he who first proposed that the weathering patterns on the Sphinx suggested that it was much older than 2,500 BC. And Robert Schoch came in and fundamentally confirmed that from a geological point of view. What does the archaeological community do? They dismiss it, they pour scorn on it, they say it's rubbish, and their argument is as follows. They say, oh, it's impossible for the Sphinx to be 12,000 years old because there was
We're
no
going for the
civilization
Dynamics
anywhere in
Tie
the
Toad.
world 12,000
We're going
years
for
ago
legendary
which
time right
capable
now,
of creating
23.
monuments
I think
on a
Dynamics.
gigantic scale like the Sphinx.
Pretty sure it's
They're
23.
saying that in
And
1995.
I think the Corey May
Again,
time.
fast forward to the 2000s, and we have the discovery and the excavation of Göbekli Tepe.
Pretty epic time.
And Göbekli Tepe, now excavated by the German Archaeological Institute, a massive
And others.
megalithic site, really on an
Kyle Reed, I
unbelievable
believe.
scale. Dates firmly to 11,600 years ago. That's
terrible.
absolutely in the 12,000 year ago window.
No, don't say that,
And
man.
if we have a culture which we now accept could create Göbekli Tepe 11,600 years ago with its 20-ton megaliths and its perfect astronomical alignments, then they would have had no problem in creating the Sphinx as well. So
It's too
that
slow,
argument
it's too
that there
slow.
was no
It's
culture
24
in the
pace.
world that was capable of creating large-scale monuments 12,000 years ago goes out the window. And again, this is not recognized.
Andrew Huberman's-
We're not making progress in this field because there's a
Interesting,
rigid
no.
dogmatic approach to the
I think
past.
I've heard
Mainstream academics have got locked in a
he's back.
particular perspective.
Oh, no
And
way.
they find
Awesome,
it
buddy.
very,
That's great.
very difficult to let that
I think I've
perspective go. And I
seen
understand
him on
human
Joe
nature,
Rogan.
And I get it. I get it. We all get
think.
attached to our own positions. I'm no exception.
That's cool, man.
I'm attached to my own position too.
That's
But
cool.
the one difference
Yeah, I'm
I
totally
think
into health
between
and
me
obviously, you
academics
know.
in this field is I do not insist that everything I say is 100% right.
On
I
Rogan
might
and
be
Lex.
wrong. I might be
Interesting.
making mistakes. What I'm trying to do is to
Yeah,
provide
that's
a
good, man.
reasoned, critical alternative to the mainstream view of the past.
I would
And I
always
believe that's a
appreciate
useful
his knowledge.
It's a service that's worthwhile offering. And unfortunately, it just leads to this endless recriminations and problems and difficulties, and it's no way to proceed. And frankly, I think mainstream archaeology should be ashamed of itself for the way that it behaves. We know so little about the past. You go back to 5,000 years ago or earlier, we don't really have any written documents. Perhaps the earliest Sumerian documents go back 6,000 years ago, nothing. No written documents have survived from that time. Everything that we understand about the past is pieced together from little artifacts dug out of the ground. And frankly speaking, even in archaeology, which regards itself as a science, not a pseudoscience, but a real science,
I'll check him
they
out
make
after.
many mistakes.
Andrew Huberman.
And I
Cool.
drew attention to that in America before. The Clovis first paradigm. The notion that the Native American culture that archaeologists call the Clovis culture were the first human beings to inhabit the Americas, was cast in stone, an absolutely rigid dogma of archaeology. And for decades actually, it resisted new evidence, which showed that people had been in the Americas much longer than that. And those who proposed that new evidence, who brought that new evidence to the table, like Jacques Cinq-Mars at Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, they were destroyed by the mainstream academy, utterly destroyed. Their research funding was withdrawn. They weren't allowed to speak at conferences anymore. The whole academic world just united against them to destroy them. And then we find actually they were right. They were right all along. And instead of making that progress 20 or 30 years earlier, we went through 20 or 30 years of unnecessary, useless delay caused by the ego and the absolute rigidity of
What?
the spokespeople of the mainstream. And this is not how it should be. The past is a shared.
I'll be
human
honest, my
resource.
friends. I think I'm
It does
still
not
pretty far
belong
away from
to
23.
archaeologists. It does not belong.
I think I'm just too
to
slow.
historians. It belongs to
Like,
all
I
of
can
us,
have the
and we all
occasional
have a vested
pacer, but
interest in
man,
finding out the truth
I'm really
about
slow.
the past. And it's
Ads,
wrong of
sorry.
the mainstream to say that the alternative side has nothing to offer in this field. We do have questions to offer, and we do increasingly have very solid evidence which is not explained by the mainstream paradigm. And generally in science, if you go on long enough when a paradigm is not supported by new evidence, when new evidence keeps on contradicting that paradigm
This is
eventually
24
will get
piece.
dumped. And I think the paradigm of our prehistory as a species is eventually going to get dumped. The paradigm that is taught in universities at the moment, but we haven't reached that point yet. It's still a struggle.
Yeah, indeed, very well said. I agree, and I think it's the other part that seems true to me over time is that as far as science goes, and including archaeology, I guess, as it, even though it's not so much a hard science, but is that the new discoveries come from the fringe. I mean, that's how those existing paradigms get challenged, and you can go, way back. The heliocentric model is probably a great example. Discovery of bacteria and the reason to wash your hands as a doctor. I mean, and in recent times, as you mentioned, bluefish caves,
What the fuck?
challenging of the Clovis doctrine, but also things like J. Harlan Bretts and catastrophism. These guys getting laughed out of the room, but
plate tectonics, which is a universally accepted theory of geology today, was regarded as pseudoscience in the 1920s.
Right.
And it was dismissed and held back for decades because of that. This is again and again the case, and I don't understand why the academy can't learn some lessons from this and have a little bit more humility, a little bit of willingness to listen to the intelligent, educated man in the street who has questions to ask and alternative point of views to present. But unfortunately, this is not the situation we're in.
Well, it's something that, as you said, I think it's becoming an overwhelming tide of new evidence at this point because, and it's the one thing that
Paperboy,
eventually
that'd be great.
we have to acknowledge that there is just so much new evidence now, particularly in
Yeah.
coming from adjacent fields of science, as well as discoveries in the field like Göbekli
It's
Tepe.
true. The
Now that the younger
Xbox
guys,
Connect didn't really have any gun shooter games. It would have been amazing. It would have been the best thing ever.
And even the ones that are negative have been, I think, counted quite effectively. I've
But
had
no.
conversations with George Howard about this as well. And even recently, there's been a discovery, and Antonio Zamora did a good video on it, of a massive global white chromosome
imagine having a, like,
in populations
Xbox.
that coincides to that younger Dryas. Now, the authors of that paper didn't tie it to the younger Dryas. They tied it to somehow just a magical kind of global cultural shift around the world that Antonio did. And yeah, it becomes very hard to resist. And then, obviously you have challenges with things like Wikipedia that are controlled by the
Yeah,
mainstream.
dude,
I've
like
dug
the
into that
Connect
in
was
time as well.
shite.
Yeah, this is the tide of evidence. Just I think at some point it's got to become overwhelming. And
I think it is getting there now. And what I've noticed is that the younger generation of archaeologists...
Imagine having Area 51. Remember that arcade game, Area 51? Growing up? With the pistols? Or Terminator? Remember the Terminator game? Oh my god.
They're much more curious,
In the arcade, the shooter, the big-ass gun.
Just commit to an
So
existing
fucking
set
sick.
of teachings without finding out more for themselves.
Imagine having that at
It's
home.
not just a matter of receiving the teaching and
On your big
reproducing
screen
it. They
TV.
actually want
Oh
to
my
get to
god.
grips with the material directly
But
themselves.
no.
But it's a kind of self-fulfilling
fun allowed.
prophecy in the academic career, because if you don't repeat what your seniors and elders have told you, if you challenge that, then you're unlikely to even get your degree. And if you get a degree, it's likely to be marked down, and God forbid that you would get any research funding.
What's X-Pac again? I can't
yeah,
remember.
I've had a couple of similar
X-Pac,
conversations
isn't he a
with emails
friggin'
I've been
wrestler?
Contacted by some archaeologists working in the field that don't want to discuss some of this stuff
X-Pac.
publicly, even though they find it plausible. But then a lot of younger students that I've been privileged enough for them to contact me and say that they're open-minded to it. So maybe it's
Wish I had the X-Men arcade game or Crazy. Oh, dude, Crazy Taxi. Yeah, I have Crazy Taxi on Dreamcast.
I've got very.
Oh, you
very
mean
high hopes for it. I think things will.
the one where you're like
I'm not
in
sure
the
if I'll
cab?
see it in my lifetime,
That's
but
insane.
I think the stepping
Dudes, I wish I had a
stones
Gravitron.
and the
Should I spend my time making a new Gravitron
my
ride
own view,
and let
very
people ride it?
strongly,
Would I make money?
is that there is
Like an
something
indoor
major
Gravitron?
missing from our prehistory. We've got a big missing chapter. Once we
Where it spins, and you're on the outer edge, and inside there's like
start to
crazy
make sense.
lights and
Göbekli
techno
Tepe
music.
doesn't make sense on its own. It has to be part of something much larger.
Some of my most favorite memories were in the Gravitron, let me tell you, man.
We now know that there are a number of other sites in the
Offspring,
area
Blossom,
that are
people.
dating
Oh
back
yeah,
to
Crazy Taxi. Yeah,
like Karahan
that's
Tepe,
true.
which I had the privilege to visit, which are dating back to the same period, and it's obvious that something very extraordinary was going on in Turkey at that
I don't
time.
own Crazy. I own a
And
burned copy.
what's
All my Dreamcast
puzzling
games
about
are
it is that
CDs
all the
burned, right?
evidence
Because that was the
shows
beauty
us
of
a population
Dreamcast.
who are entirely
It was
hunter-gatherers
so breakable
before Göbekli Tepe
in
is
terms
created.
of
And
jailbreaking.
then Göbekli Tepe is
You don't need to
created, and
jailbreak
at the
it. You
same
just burn
time they switch from
games
hunter-gathering
CDs.
to
It's the best.
agriculture. They start making the switch. So we have two mysteries
Controller
here.
kind of sucks,
We have
but
agriculture suddenly blossoming in Turkey around 11,600, 12,000 years ago.
the D-pad is okay on it
And we have
for retro games.
a megalithic site on an enormous scale that is built at that time, and neither of them have any background. They just seem to come out of nowhere. But there must be a background. What Göbekli Tepe has always looked like. And this is just my opinion. I don't claim it's a fact like our archaeologist friends. I'm simply stating my opinion, looking at it, having worked through many, many sites around the world. My opinion at Göbekli Tepe is we're looking at a transfer of technology. We're looking at evidence that people who already knew how to create megaliths came to that area and began to teach those skills to the local hunter-gatherer population. And those people also knew about agriculture. And they taught agriculture at the same time. Maybe even, pure speculation, maybe the creation of that enormous megalithic site was used as a focal point, as a place to mobilize populations, to give them an interest and an investment and a big project to be engaged in, which would automatically create more organization of labor and then spread that out to agriculture. But it's fascinating that the site comes first and the agriculture comes second. The normal, again, if we go back to the established paradigm.
Well, I totally hit that camera.
Archaeologists will tell you that megalithic sites
Fuck off.
required a population that was already agriculture, that had evolved to
This might be
such an
23
extent
pace.
that they could organize.
Looks
labor,
like 23
that they
pace.
were generating surpluses, that they could free people from the labor of agriculture and allow them to become specialist engineers or architects or
Yeah,
astronomers.
it's 23
That's
pace, I
supposed to
think.
be the setting, and Göbekli Tepe doesn't fit into that setting. It challenges that setting, and rather than just saying, "Oh well, this is a bit of a problem, but let's ignore it," it would be much better to say, "Well, how actually can we explain this?" And one explanation, a reasonable explanation, is a transfer of technology. That when you see a sudden change like that with no background, you have to consider the possibility that it's been introduced to that.
And I mean, that's also a premise that's reflected in the myths and legends of so many other cultures, right? You have these stories of great civilizers and these like
All
demigod
around
types of people, Viracochas and the Shemsu Four and Zeptepi in Egypt.
Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, Osiris in Egypt.
Why?
These are all figures. They're so similar all around the world, and their mission in every case is to reignite civilization after a global catastrophe. And yet archaeology tells us to ignore all of these myths and traditions from the past, that they're just fantasies of the ancients, that there never was any. I mean, archaeologists will say that there never was any flood. Well, I'm sorry, there was a flood. Sea level rose 400 feet between the end of the last ice age and 10,000 and 11,600 years ago. 400-foot rise in sea level, 27 trillion square kilometers of land swallowed, the best land on Earth, the coastal lands, swallowed up by those rising seas. That is a flood. And it didn't come all at once. It came in a series of episodes. But there was a big episode right at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, 12,800 years ago, and there was an even bigger episode 11,600 years ago at the end of the Younger Dryas. And that 11,600 years ago, as I'm sure you know, is the date that Plato gives us for the submergence of Atlantis. This cannot be a coincidence. If it's a coincidence, it's an extraordinary one, that we have this Greek philosopher who speaks of the visit of his ancestor Solon to Egypt in a date that in our calendar is around 600 BC. And Solon is told by Egyptian priests the story of Atlantis and brings that story
21
back
pause
to
there.
Greece, and Plato eventually reports it to us. And when Solon asked those Egyptian priests who spoke of the flooding and destruction of Atlantis, when did this happen? They said quite matter-of-factly, 9,000 years ago. Well, that was in 600 BC, so that's 9,600 BC. In other words, 11,600 years ago. In other words, the date of Göbekli Tepe. I mean, either this is just a coincidence beyond belief, or there's something really spooky going on here. Plato was so right. That is meltwater pulse 1b. Ask any geologist when meltwater pulse 1b occurred, and they'll tell you 11,600 years ago.
Maybe Plato had an ice core from Greenland or something like that. That was working from.
Something like that, and yet the mainstream tries to dismiss Plato's Atlantis story as yet another one of those fantasies. Well, we're running out of excuses to dismiss the stories of the past. We need to listen to the testimony of the ancients. We can't claim to have grasped and understood the past if we don't listen to what the ancients had to say, and there's hardly a culture anywhere in the world that doesn't speak of a lost civilization, of a great civilization, of a golden age, of a flood that brought it to an end.
Yeah, flood or fire, and I think that there are more or less eyewitness accounts of some of this stuff encoded in these myths and legends from around the world, be it flood or fire. I mean, and if you think about the nature of humanity, when you're in an era where it's oral tales, you're not writing things down, you don't encode just data, you deify things, you put a story and a framework.
This might be 23 pages. Oh no, it's not.
And it ends up looking like it is.
One of the ways, that's one of the ways, if you have
24?
information that you wish to transmit to the future, one of the ways to transmit it is to put it into a story that people will keep on telling. And of course the story will be full of symbolic elements. But if the story is good and it grips people's imagination, it will go on being told even if those who are telling it don't really understand what it's about anymore. And it'll be there, it'll survive for thousands of years and can eventually be looked at again. And we need to look at these stories of the ancients. We need to look at these stories of global flood, global cataclysm, and indeed fire. And that is why the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is such an intriguing answer to all of these problems and needs to be taken incredibly seriously by archaeologists. Just for your listeners, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis refers to a period of geological history that geologists call the Younger Dryas. It's actually named after a particular species of alpine flower that flourishes in cold conditions.
What a stupid boost, man.
And the Younger Dryas sets in suddenly 12,800 years ago, and it ends equally suddenly 11,600 years ago. 12,800 years ago, the world has been emerging from the Ice Age. For several thousand years, things have been getting warmer. In fact, it's almost as warm 12,800 years ago as it is today, although there's still a lot of ice caps left. And then this sudden change of climate, a massive deep freeze, huge extinctions of animal species, a very mysterious rise in sea level. Normally, when you get a freeze, you don't get a rise in sea level because the water's all frozen. So now we must invoke some kind of heat source to explain how at the onset of a huge global deep freeze, an enormous amount of water is released into the world ocean. The best explanation for that is the comet impact hypothesis, which is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, suggesting that the Younger Dryas was caused by multiple impacts from fragments of a disintegrating comet. That's what set it on its course.
Yeah, we needed some, and this is something I've discussed with Randall quite a bit, is that we needed some injection of energy to that system, because there is a real paradox here for geologists about how all that ice melted. Because if you took all of that ice that contributed to that 400-foot sea level rise, and even 10 to 15,000 years ago, you plopped it in the warmest water in the world, say around Indonesia, it would take something like 30,000 years to melt just sitting in warm water, and it melted in a fairly short period of time. And as you said, in these giant bursts. And if ever anybody wants evidence of catastrophic flooding, get yourself up to the Channeled Scablands in eastern Washington State in the United States. It's an incredible landscape, first of all, but once you understand the events that shape that landscape, it's a mind-blowing experience to get up there and actually see it for yourself.
I had the privilege of making that journey with Randall Carlson. I think you've done something similar. Yeah. Randall is just such an acute observer of the geological landscape, and things that you might miss, he points them out to you, and you suddenly realize that what you're looking at is current ripples that are, hundreds of feet long and 40 or 50 feet high. The kind of ripples that you get on a beach on a very small scale, we find in the Channeled Scablands on
Get
a
out of here.
gigantic
What?
scale, but they're caused by the same thing,
Sucks.
the recession of floodwaters. And you know, suddenly you start looking at the whole world in a different framework, and we need to remind ourselves that cataclysms are a regular part of life on Earth, but they have driven life on Earth for not just for millennia, but for millions of years. And perhaps it's not so surprising that a cataclysm intervened in the human story.
Yeah, that's right. We're learning that they happen much more frequently than we think we did, which kind of leads me to another question for you that I really have always wanted to ask, which has to do with the
Such
importance
stupid
of
boost, man. Like, these boosts are just so
understanding
dumb.
why figuring out this mystery is important, because for me I think it almost feels like in our civilization, our modern technologically driven world, I think you termed it an electromechanical approach to problem solving. You know, it's as if I think most people go through life as if it's a fundamental tenet of existence here is that we're on some preordained path. We've come from the Stone Age directly to here. This is the way that civilizations go. And I think that if there was a more general acceptance that, oh no, like humanity's risen to great heights in the past, only to have been just struck down and destroyed by cataclysm, it might change. It's an altruistic, is all hell is gold, but it might change to help some of our trajectory, some of our priorities, and maybe spend a little less money on tanks and a little more money on exploring the heavens, kind of thing.
Exactly, and also on mitigating man-made disasters as well, because cataclysms don't come from the cosmos. They can also
Please. Oh, you fucking suck, Boris. Fuck you. Like, that was my fault. Damn it, I suck.
So yeah, that's
Oh.
I think I'm trying to figure out how to frame that, like why this stuff is important, because some people kind of brush off the historical perspective.
It's important, first of all, at a personal level. Every one of us likes to know our family background, where we came from. We often can't trace it back very far. I can't trace my own family back beyond my great-grandfather. I've heard vague rumors about what happened. But we like to situate ourselves in some way. It helps to give us a sense of who we are and where we are. And if this is true at an individual level, it's also true at the level of the human race. We want to know where we came from, how we got into this position. And it's an ideological...
Oh, no, I didn't. I had to call my friend right when you... I downloaded the update. I'll do it now. I'll do it after this. Nice, buddy. Let me see. I'll check after this run. Sorry, my buddy called me.
From the Stone Age to us today with our striped toothpaste or whatever. But it's not. This is ideology. This is not a fact. This is how we...
Oh, cool. Sleep timer? Nice, man. Oh, that's amazing, dude.
And if we don't find ourselves,
What?
we define those cultures as
That's amazing.
Whereas there's many ways to be sophisticated.
That's dope, man. That's really dope.
It's lacking in
That is quite
many
dope.
important qualities that a civilization
Nice, buddy.
should have. But the worst thing of all
Congrats.
is
I like it. I like that update a lot. I'm gonna use it now. I'm probably definitely gonna use it now more than ever.
There's nothing for our technology will solve everything for us. That is a huge error. Life.
You know what's interesting, Toad? I listened to some meditation music that's like 20-30 minutes long, and it realigns like the cranial spinal fluid. It realigns it with your brain from your pituitary gland in the center of your head and your brain down your spine, and it's a rhythmic music. And I'm thinking if I put some like rain and crickets or something along with that for half an hour, dude, it'd be insane.
But not very good at doing anything else.
Or fire or some shit.
And if you come
or a fan.
to a global cataclysm, somebody who's a specialist in computer science isn't really going to be that much use in feeding his or her family.
Direct line to Donald.
And it's why those who are most likely to survive a global cataclysm today, in my view, would be the meat of the earth. It would be those few remaining hunter-gatherer populations in the Amazon rainforest, in the Namibian desert. Those few remaining hunter-gatherer populations that still exist on the earth, these are people who know how to survive. They can pass through a horrendous global cataclysm and hardly be scratched. It wouldn't affect their morale, it wouldn't affect their outlook their confidence, but it would destroy
Or you can advertise it
because our confidence
as a
is no longer based
commuting.
in our own abilities.
If people are
It's based
commuting and they
in
want
what
some
society as
ASMR
a
to
whole
relax while
provides us.
commuting or
And I
something, or
think
while driving, or
the psychic
on the bus or some
collapse
shit.
of Western civilization, confronted by a huge cataclysm, would be extremely rapid and very, very awful. And we would be in
The
a
commuter
situation where
ASMR
people are
app.
just gunning each other down in the street very, very rapidly. We don't have the moral fiber to deal with a situation like that. We've got lazy, we've got idle, we've got far too secure, far too comfortable.
Because I'm sure people will be on the bus looking at their phone, at their apps, what to download, and they see a call commuter ASMR app. Advertise it. Just close your eyes, listen to the sounds of rain, or frogs, or crickets, or fire, or wind, or whatever combination. The most comprehensive commuter AMR app.
Almost on a long enough timescale, destined to happen. Right? I think ultimately.
Well, unless we grow up
Mm-hmm.
and change things, and it begins at the person to person level, and it spreads out to the nation to nation.
You should get into like some programs too, some government programs or school programs, because they do. That's what they do. They tell people to download mindfulness
The notion
apps.
of nations to me is a passé notion. It's
Toronto
notion
Rehab does
it's
that. Toronto Rehab.
it's no
They
longer
want me to
useful
download these
us.
mindfulness apps. No ASMR, but kind of ASMR, yeah, with music, relaxing music and
Very
stuff.
puzzling,
If you can get on that train,
I never understood why.
where it doesn't even cost them money to recommend it, it just gets recommended because it helps them. You know what I mean?
I don't see why.
If you can somehow get on
to
that
spread
train.
the argument further to the issue of race. Why should I especially like somebody because their skin color is roughly the same as mine? I mean, what should we do next? Should we go around measuring colons? You know, and if I have the colon the same length as somebody else, then I've specially got something in common with him. I mean, the colon is an important organ.
Or
just
apply
like
to the
skin,
government
you know, but we don't
saying that
weigh
your
and
app
measure people on the size of their colon.
provides mental health
And we shouldn't weigh and measure people on the
service,
color of their skin either. And we shouldn't.
and that you need money for further
absolutely
development
pit
and
nation
maintenance.
against nation
And
in
you get it on the
these
iOS
ridiculous
platform.
struggles. We are one people. One thing I've learned from traveling the world all my working life, and it's very fundamental, is that people are the same all over. No matter where you are, you can be in the desert, you can be in a highly sophisticated city, the same hopes, the same fears. We all love our kids. We all want to make a solid future for ourselves. People are not different from one another. The similarities between people of different cultures are far greater than the differences. And it's time we celebrated this and recognized this. Often when I say something like this, I'm accused of wanting a world government. No, thank you. I don't want a world government. I don't want any government. I'm an anarchist. I don't think we need governments, but we will. The governments persuade us that we need them. This is the problem, and what's needed is adult responsibility. We need to move on. We need to upgrade our consciousness to a level where the functions played by government are as minimal as possible. This macro scale government that we have at the moment is a very destructive consequence of the way our civilization has been moving.
Yeah, as someone who's lived in Asia, I live in the United States. Now I have friends all over the world.
Same booths.
I absolutely agree with you. And I've had the same opinion about nationality and borders and things like that. And I kind of look at society.
Guys, 23 is so fast. I don't know if I'm going to get it today.
Forward very rapidly, and technology is maybe one of them. But
like it's just too fast.
Like government and our system of society and how we do that. It's stood still for hundreds of years now, and it's just, yeah, as you say, like.
Look at how long, for example, look at how long it's taken to remove criminal sanctions from the use of cannabis. And look at that insane war on drugs, which has caused so much harm and so much damage. That has persisted for so many decades that it's still not got rid of. It's one area where I really appreciate what the American people are doing. Which is state by state, they are legalizing cannabis. They are basically saying, fuck you to the central authority and saying this is what we want to do. And that is an important thing. There have been so many lies told to us about cannabis in the war on drug story, so much illusion, so much so much falsification of the facts. So we live in a culture where it's okay to get absolutely drunk on alcohol, leading to all manner of car accidents, fights, physical illnesses. That's okay. But if somebody smokes cannabis, then they get sent to jail. This is obviously insane, but the fact that it's obviously insane hasn't prevented it staying in place.
Like, this isn't even 23 pace. This is like 25, 24 now.
Yeah, indeed, and in the States, and there's kind of a weird
It's 24.
Dichotomy here, where it's the US was also the one responsible for pushing that prohibition more or less across the world in the first place, and it's also the states that are now changing it, as you say, at that grassroots level.
The prohibition was pushed by US government.
That's right. Well, US government.
That back boost, man, it's just so terrible.
Is being pushed by the US people.
Two different things.
They're two very different things, and this is what we need more of in the world. Is informed democracy, where the people make the choices, where choices are not made for us by experts. I detest the fact that it is okay. It's still okay in Britain for somebody to tell me what I may or may not experience in the inner sanctum of my own consciousness while doing no harm to others. This is the most invasive abuse of human rights. If an adult cannot make decisions about their own health and their own consciousness, always
look at that boost. That boost was amazing.
No harm to others. They can't make those.
That was really fascinating.
They're not free in any meaningful sense, and in fact, the very word freedom becomes actually meaningless.
It's one of the things that I most like about the US is that inbuilt-in, it's like a baked-in concept of freedom. It has something to do with how the country was founded, and it's like it's a real fundamental part of the character here, and I have that juxtaposition with Australia, which is unfortunately gone in the opposite direction. And
terribly direction.
Yeah, my sympathies to everyone that's stuck in Australia. I mean, I couldn't go back there if I wanted to at the moment, but yeah, there's still marijuana, cannabis is a dangerous drug. It's they're still on that thing.
Wow, insane.
They claim to be guided by science. These people.
That third cam, I maintained strafe. I didn't stop, and I was only 23 still.
In fact, it's not dangerous at all. There isn't even a lethal dose of cannabis.
No.
It's just a very crazy situation, and again, at the root of it is ideology. Ideology is driving this, not facts, not science, but ideology.
Control.
And control,
Control.
Because that's what people in government want to do. They want to control others. This is another shift in consciousness that needs to take place. The point of government is to serve, not to control. And if governments cease serving and maximize control, then we've gone terribly, terribly wrong. And that's what's happening now. But there are personality types, and by and large, somebody who goes into government is somebody who would like to control others and feels that they are right to direct and guide the path of others' lives. We have to grow out of this. If the human species, however many of us that there are now, 7 billion or whatever it is, 8 billion people on planet Earth, if we're going to get through the next 100, 200 years, we're going to have very radical changes in consciousness that take place. And the enormous
wow, insane.
harm done by government.
Did you see that third cam? I almost did it.
And we need to empower adults to make sovereign decisions and to be responsible for their own decisions. This is another mistake. The over-controlling governments take away the requirement for us to be responsible for ourselves. They hand that responsibility over to some state bureaucracy or some state.
Yo, Watch Party Central, bro. Yeah, it is. The WPC, buddy.
Right.
The OG Cloud9, man. What's going on, dude?
And there's, like you say, there's
How are you,
a
bro?
slow mechanism that's starting to happen that generates that change in consciousness. And I think that has a lot to do with psychedelics and things like cannabis and just people. Also, the power of the internet, which is I often see as
It's a
remarkable thing where you can now be educated from anywhere in the world, but it's a knife to cut.
Doing well, buddy. I'm doing well, my man.
It's also something that can completely consume, or just you can mindlessly entertain yourself on it and never sort of.
Uncle Juan, yeah, my dude.
Absolutely, it's a mixed gift or a poisoned chalice in some ways. But I'd still rather have it than not have it. because it has
Oh my gosh.
given a voice.
We're going for
to
the
some
Dynamics
extent, to the
DJ
powerless.
tie
Go back
right
20
now.
years, from the point of view of an author.
We are 1 second
Let's
away
say
from
go back
tying the
25
DJ,
years to when I published The Principle of Gods in 1995.
and I feel very far away from it.
And you would find at that time that the
Dadish, yeah.
mainstream media controlled everything. If you wanted to get your message out to a broad general public, there was no other way to do it except to channel it.
I
through
call
the
it. No, I'm not going to say
a
it.
big newspaper serializing it, or a big TV channel. running
No,
a
he's
big
not
TV.
here.
Well, that's all changed, and I welcome that change. I think it's a great
He
change.
is
because now we
not.
have this means where people can speak directly to one another. Of course, there are.
He's out being
Of course, there are.
a boss, a
Of
legend,
course, there's a lot of misinformation with the
big name
information.
DJ.
That's also part of what comes.
No,
with
seriously
being a
though, if you
responsible adult.
have you heard his drum and
We have
bass
to sift
songs? It's
information
fucking
for
sick.
ourselves and figure
Sick,
out what's
sick
right and
producer,
what's
sick
wrong
DJ.
and what works for us. We don't have to wait for some expert to tell us what we need to think. Fuck experts in my view. We're all experts. We all should empower ourselves with that.
Just go knock on his door.
That
Okay.
we do not need to be told what to think. We can think for ourselves. We do not need to be led. We can lead ourselves. This is the next step forward.
Yeah, well said. So maybe let me circle back a little bit to the lost civilization and we can kind of wrap it, do a final topic on this if you like. Because one thing I've always wondered about is what's your opinion on what that lost civilization may have looked like, and from a couple of different aspects here is one is that obviously there is evidence and we've had hunter-gatherer cultures, we've had a Stone Age all through the Pleistocene in that era, and then the other angle that I'm interested in recently is the intermingling, because we've got modern humans go back maybe as far as 300, 350,000 years.
All right, be right back. Be right back.
Morocco,
Thanks for being here, Clyde.
but we also in that period have many other forms of humans, and that whole extended family, if you like, has been recently extended. There's the Dragon Man skull that's been recently discovered in China. There's been another species discovered. Denisovan.
He may be. That skull may be of a Denisovan individual. If so, it would be the first Denisovan skull to have been discovered.
Because before that, it's like a pinky, right? So.
Yeah, we don't, and the complete genome was derived from that pinky. So we don't know. But what's become clear is that our picture of the past had been very limited until the Neanderthal genome was sequenced, which was 2010. There was a completely false notion of the Neanderthal, and the notion that, of course, human beings never interpreted them. Well, that went out the window with the genome because we know
we did.
in fact, we are the Neanderthals today. The Neanderthals survive in anatomically modern humans, about 4% of DNA in some populations. In the case of Denisovans, some populations, particularly in Australasia, these ancient species are part of the human story, and there's evidence that they certainly were not skewed. There's more and more evidence coming out now that the Neanderthals were doing cave art. They probably taught cave art to anatomically modern humans rather than the other way around. Our special position, the so-called special position, is being healthily undermined by realize that we're part of a very complex process rather than a very simple and direct process. But what would the lost civilization have looked like is where you came into this point. I think the first point I need to make is that the world we live in today is a world where we have a highly advanced civilization. I think we can fairly speak of a global civilization. I don't think we even need to use the words like the West or the East anymore. I think it's a global technological civilization has arisen in this world, and it's capable of extraordinary feats. A country that was absolutely on the poverty line 50 or 60 years ago, China, is now sending missions to Mars. We're a highly advanced technological global culture. But we coexist with hunter-gatherers. I spoke a few moments ago about the hunter-gatherers in the Amazon, some of whom don't even know that our civilization exists, the so-called uncontacted tribes. the hunter-gatherers in Namibia. Well, they know we exist, but they choose not to coexist with us too much. So the notion that hunter-gatherer cultures could have in the past coexisted with an advanced civilization is not a ridiculous idea at all, because that's what happens today. We have an advanced civilization coexisting with hunter-gatherer cultures. And if our advanced civilization were destroyed by a global cataclysm and there were survivors, those survivors would be smart to go and seek refuge amongst hunter-gatherers. That's what they should do, because the hunter-gatherers are the masters of survival. And they would be the ones who the survivors might try to transfer some of their technology to. And that's what I think we're looking at in terms of Göbekli Tepe. But I don't think that the proposed lost civilization was a mirror image of our own.
Oh, no.
At all. I think it was very different. I think it emerged out of shamanism and out of the techniques of ecstasy that are used in shamanism, and I think altered states of consciousness were a very important and essential part of that. And just because we do everything through mechanical advantage and leverage doesn't mean that they did that. I've often said this, but it strikes me as likely to be true, that the more we depend on machines and computers and calculators to work everything out, the more abilities within us become dormant, abilities which we could develop. I mean, for example, let's say, this is something, of course, my critics will immediately jump on me and call me a pseudoscientist. But let's say there is such a thing as telepathy. Let's say there is such a thing as telepathy. Well, once you've got the written word, telepathy becomes less and less necessary. It begins to be replaced by the written word. And soon, if that ability is dormant in human beings, it would go to sleep completely and would no longer be used. And I suspect that the lost civilization of the Ice Age was able to do remarkable material things, but they probably did them in different ways than we do. And it's not good enough to say, oh, that's just pseudoscience. There are many different ways to do things. We've followed one particular track, but I think they probably followed others. And so I take sound being used to levitate enormous blocks of stone, and we do have modern science which is doing levitation on a small scale with sound already. It's not a ridiculous idea anymore. It makes perfect sense to me. The notion of magicians who come and bring their skills to a place, dismissed as pseudoscience, yet I think there's an old saying, magic is just science we don't understand.
That's exactly right. And I look at the past in a similar light, but I guess from a technological perspective, but in the sense that we've progressed down a particular technological path, and it is entirely possible, indeed very likely, that there exist entire realms of other forms of technology that are more organic based. So people often say, why didn't they build the pyramids if they were so advanced out of metals and structures and lightweight? Like we do that because we need to make lightweight, strong material. But if you have an effortless ability to work with organic material like granite, basalt, or limestone, then you have no need to develop titanium alloys and all these other things. I think in 100 years, 1,000 years, we'll know much more about technology, and that's why I think it's so important to look at these things with an open mind.
If you were a wise civilization, you might choose not to pursue particular routes of technology.
Right.
Plastics. We unwisely have pursued.
Yes.
We have pursued. So we're never going to find ourselves in the past. That's not what we're going to find. And if we look for ourselves in the past, we won't find ourselves. But we do find evidence of a much higher level of civilization during the Ice Age than the mainstream presently gives our Ice Age ancestors credit for. And I think one of the best examples of that, really, really useful example, is the survival of ancient maps that showed the world as it looked during the Ice Age. Maps. Now we know that the history of these maps is complex, because the ones that have come down to us were made in the 15th, 16th centuries, but they were copied from older source maps, which are now lost, and they conveyed the contents of those source maps onto the new maps, and they mixed it together with discoveries from the age of discovery. But when you start looking at those maps in detail, whether it's the Orontius Phineas map or some of the Mercator maps, you realize that you're looking at things that don't make sense according to the knowledge of the 15th or 16th century. You see, for example, Antarctica depicted on those maps. Our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820. But it's there on maps in the 1500s that were copied from much older source maps, now lost, going back, we know, in some cases, to the Library of Alexandria. You see an enormously extended Southeast Asia, very much like the Sunda Shelf, which was exposed and above water during the Ice Age. And very steeply, you see very precise relative longitudes. And that tells you you're dealing with science, because we couldn't do longitude until the middle of the 18th century. And when I find, it was just an unknown, it was the dream of all navigators that somehow they could fix longitude. Yeah. But until a marine chronometer was invented that could keep accurate time at sea, longitude was impossible. So to find accurate longitudes on these maps that were copied in the 1500s from much older source maps tells us there's something really wrong with the way we're understanding our past.
That's right, yeah. Not until James Cook's second voyage of discovery did we be able to do it. I mean, that's where that old running down an easting or running down a westing came from, because they had to go north and west until they hit where they wanted, and then they would travel. I think.
There was even a big prize. A prize was offered for solving the longitude problem, and I think it went to Harrison for his chronometer. Which finally could keep accurate time at sea. Well, that's 18th century technology, but to find evidence of 18th century technology in the Ice Age is pretty disturbing to the mainstream paradigm.
It is. It's even reflected in the Great Pyramid. I don't know if this is when you take the perimeter of the Great Pyramid and the ratio of its perimeter to the ratio of the socle, which is the shelf that it sits on, that's about this much wider. That perimeter is the exact ratio of latitude to longitude on a planet, being an oblate sphere. We're slightly more east to west than we are north to south. So there's some evidence to suggest that the accurate measurement of the planet and the ratio of latitude and longitude is reflected in the dimensions of the Great Pyramid.
Well, I've been convinced of this for a long time, and it goes back to my readings of Hamlet's Mill. I don't know if you've
I have a copy of it here. It's a fun read.
Incredibly important book. It's an incredibly important book, which is largely ignored by mainstream scholarship today. But Giorgio de Santillana was the professor of the history of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Hertha von Deschen, his co-author, was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. These were serious people. And what they found was an ancient knowledge of the phenomenon called precession of the equinoxes. And precession of the equinoxes, I'm not going to bore your listeners with a long and detailed description, but fundamentally it changes the background stars against which the sun is seen to rise at particular key moments of the year. The solstices and the equinoxes is when it's most noticeable. And this process is caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth itself, and because that's our viewing platform, the changes in its orientation affect the star field. These changes take place at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And these numbers, based on the number 72, 30 times 72 is 2,160, 60 times 72 is 4,320. These numbers appear all over the world in mythology, all around the world, tied up with imagery of a giant mill turning. And Santillana and von Deschen make an impeccable case that what these traditions are recording is detailed knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes thousands of years before the Greeks supposedly discovered the precession. And this is where the Great Pyramid gets interesting, because I'm sure you know this, that you've already mentioned the latitude, longitude, the height of the Great Pyramid, multiplied by 43,200 gives you the polar radius of the Earth. And the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid multiplied by 43,200 gives you the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And that would be quite easy to dismiss as a coincidence if it wasn't 43,200. But 43,200 is one of those numbers generated by precession of the equinoxes, where the base is 72 years for 1 degree. So it's 600 times 72. So what we have is a geometrical scale model which gives us the dimensions of the Earth, and it does so on a scale set by a key motion of the Earth itself. I mean, you know, this cannot be an accident.
No.
This is very, very clever workmanship that's gone into this, and evidence of high science in remote antiquity. And it just astonishes me that the mainstream ignores all this, and doesn't even want to go there.
And that's it's another example of how we pass data down through time. It's not just, you know, eyewitness accounts of cataclysmic events, but there is actual astronomical data encoded in these myths and legends that have even passed through cultures that should have had no understanding of it whatsoever. That's what I found remarkable about Hamlet's Mill.
Absolutely. It's almost as though, and actually Satayana and Vandeshant hint at this, because they attribute this knowledge to some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. It's almost as though a group of people sat down to permanently memorialize this information and to pass it down to the future. And the fundamental message they were sending was, take us seriously. We knew our stuff. We had worked out the precession of the equinoxes. We knew the dimensions of the Earth. We knew the Earth was a sphere. We had mapped the entire world. Take us seriously. And unfortunately, that is what mainstream archaeology is not doing. Is not taking the voices of the past seriously, unless it's some king's inscription, or some duke or earl.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, and there's other connections too that seem to come from that common ancestor. One of the things I loved about America before was the connection you made between the cultures of the mound builders and the ancient Egyptians, from, you know, spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, and then in particular the role of the astronomer seemed to be just
such
remarkable.
Astonishing, remarkable comparisons. And I'm not suggesting that ancient Egyptians went to North America and passed on their ideas to Native Americans. What I'm suggesting is that both the Native American cultures and the ancient Egyptian cultures were the inheritors of a legacy from a much earlier culture that was shared and common to both, and that passed down the same information in both places. And that's why you get these astonishing similarities, which otherwise simply cannot be explained.
All right, well, Graham Hancock, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you and speaking with you again. Thanks for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Really nice to talk to you again as well. Thanks for having me on the show.
You too. Cheers.
Wow, insane. It's over. I'm gonna keep playing though. I'm gonna put another podcast on. Hello everyone, welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I'm very happy to say that I've got another podcast for you today with the one and only Randall Carlson. Randall is somebody who should need no introduction to regular viewers of this channel. I was very pleased to get the chance to sit down with him once again and get into a discussion about several different topics. We got into kind of a deep dive on the Carolina Bays, talked a little bit more about Randall's backstory. We got into some of the cosmological and mythological implications of comets and the astral bodies and what they mean for civilization and religion and stories. We even got into a discussion around climate change, as well as the dreaded cancel culture. Should be a bit of fun for everyone who likes getting into those topics. I do want to say a massive thank you to Randall for again spending some time with me. I very much enjoyed our conversation.
You can find more of Randall's work over on his channel, which is titled appropriately Randall Carlson. It's the home for his excellent Cosmographia podcast that he does with Brad and the Snake Brothers and Mike. It's a great show. I'd recommend it. You can also find his work hosted over on howtube.com. Randall is kind of a flagship account for Howtube, as well as on his website, which is randallcarlson.com. Those are all linked below, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. All right, well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm thrilled to say that I'm being joined once again by the great Randall Carlson of Cosmographia. Randall, it's great to see you. Thanks again so much for taking the time to talk with me.
My pleasure, Ben. It's great to see you again, too.
Indeed.
I'm looking forward to hanging out with you again in the real world.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
God,
yeah, definitely. For the first time, I haven't met you in person, so and we'll get the chance to up in the Scablands in May. Yeah, I'm also very much.
Well, wait a minute. We didn't meet in Egypt, did you? That was just a digital meeting, wasn't it?
It was.
I wasn't in Egypt when you were there. What am I thinking?
You were. Well, you did turn up on the on our television screen in my hotel room in Egypt. That was pretty cool. Yeah. Randall, for people that don't know, Randall was kind enough to spend a couple of hours talking with our tour group. Doing a Q&A while we were in Egypt, and he had some time. It was something that was kindly organised by yourself and George Howard. Big thanks to you.
Yeah, good old George.
Good old George, yes. He emailed me the other day. Yeah, looking forward to chatting with him again soon too.
Yeah, so whenever we have our conference, we'll have to make sure that we invite George.
Definitely. Yeah, no, George is a good time, and he's a very knowledgeable guy as well. Deep on the younger dries. He's part of the Comet Research Group. I mean, part of that first paper in 2005 that got the whole.
Oh, I knew about George
started.
at least a decade before I even met him.
Yeah.
I read that first paper by George, and I thought, I mean, this is, we're talking about 98 or something. I read a paper, George Howard. Wow, this guy really is onto it. You know, maybe there's like 4 people in the world, I think, who are onto this, younger dryas impact idea, and hey, here's one of them, this guy George Howard.
Yeah.
I wonder who he is. Who is this guy?
Man, I was thrilled when he rang me up, or he talked to me and said, "Hey, I want to come to Egypt," and he hadn't been. Well, he had been when he was a kid, and then he coming back, and he was just a great traveling companion too. He was a lot of fun, for sure. So yeah, look, hopefully we'll get the chance again at some point. That would be pretty epic.
Yeah, I remember being on a phone conversation with him, and he told me you were planning to trip to Egypt. He was thinking about going. And he said, if I go, is there any place particular you would want me to go? Just like I think you did. I said, well, yeah, I mean, all of the places, obviously, the standards like Luxor and all of those places. But I said, go to the capital, Denver, photograph the ceiling.
Yes.
Because, man, there are cosmic secrets displayed all over the ceiling walls.
They really are. Yeah. In fact, that's a topic. We'll get into that. I do have a question about it because it's and in some ways it's that relationship of the zodiac and the sky. A lot of that stuff comes back from there as well. Like we have that represented in ancient Egypt as well, and we can get into that. And we kind of talked about it a little bit because you were kind enough to invite me onto your podcast, which I was on, I think, a few weeks back now, Cosmographia. So anybody that wants to know where to find more of Randall than you can handle, go and look at the Randall Carlson's channel, Cosmographia. You guys do a podcast every week, pretty much. It gets released.
We record it every week, and it usually gets posted like 2 weeks after.
Right. Yeah, fantastic series of podcasts. I got to say, it's fountain of knowledge and just the topics you cover in detail. I mean, it's impossible to get into that level of detail in like a 2-hour podcast here. You guys are sort of methodically working through topics, and I know you have a plan for how you're working through stuff, and I think it's great. I highly recommend people go and subscribe and watch your stuff.
Well, thank you. And then, of course, now How-To is rolled out.
Yes.
Cosmographia has become a flagship website for How-To, which is exciting. And I should actually show people the...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, show us. Go ahead. Screen share now. Because it's how is it? What's the address for that? It's howto.com.
Howto.com.
Hey, what's that?
Hey, how about that, eh?
Randall's live on Howto.
Well, they hired a professional model for this homepage here.
That's
a
great.
lot of money. Still figuring out what. I see.
Yeah. View Randall's channel. Hit that. That's.
Oh,
So you
okay.
all of you on the front there, that View Randall's channel. Assuming that's all of your content is going to be hosted over there.
All of it, yeah.
Okay.
So we go through, people could, learn about the whole system that's been, it's pretty much cutting edge system here. And you can go through all the benefits, and there's going to be a lot of the things are, responses to what's going on with the more mainstream platforms. So the idea is it's going to be curated, but it's going to be much more open to a lot of possibilities.
Right. So courses and learning and sort of
Yes.
stuff, things like
Yes.
that. That's great. Yeah. And
Project.
okay. Yeah, and that's looks like it's launched, and I know there'll be a lot more coming out on that.
Oh yeah, there's tons. We'll just go to random chances. We got, Mark After School is going to be one of the flagship content
Okay.
creators.
Yep.
Which is awesome. He does awesome stuff. So here now goes to the Randall. Right here you'll see the podcast episodes.
Yep.
So
Look at it. A lot of content. I was going to say too, because the other place to find you have a couple of websites. It's randallcarlson.com and I think also cosmographia.com. That's like the best places to find you.
yeah, randallcarlson.com will get you to everything. It'll get you to the Cosmographic podcast. Will get you to how to.
Excellent. Yeah, and one thing to mention, because I've seen this on Twitter once or twice, is that you're not affiliated. There's because people look for you on the web, sometimes they'll run into something called it's Sacred Geometry International, and I know that we talked about this earlier, but you're not affiliated.
What,
with
the
that.
back
And
boost?
I've seen
What?
It also on
That
Twitter
was so
because
dumb, man.
People think that's you on Twitter. There's also an official Randall Carlson on Twitter. It's not SGI. It's not Sacred Geometry International. I don't believe you're affiliated with them in any way. You certainly don't benefit from it in any way.
I do not. I am not. I was, and at some point in the near future, I'll get into why I'm not no longer associated with it. For the time being, though, people need to know that any sales
Come on.
of my work there, I receive
Fuck you.
zero remuneration for it.
Like, fuck you.
They're buying class.
If I didn't get boosted, I would 100% hit that camera. Like, 100%.
I see that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, if you're looking for Randall's work, find it here at HowTube, your website.
Yes, and I will mention the safety geometry course that's for sale on it's 10 years old. It's never finished. And that's one of the reasons amongst others I pretty much. So we are now creating.
Oh, dude, there's a website?
Probably will not
I'll send it to you after stream.
summer.
So I learned...
It's going to be king.
So I was talking to a recruiter that is hiring a grant proposal writer for
I think I've said
Deloitte.
before, like your old videos,
And-
like just,
But it's only when there's grants available,
I think I said this the
and
last
it's on a
podcast, but I've been in
website
that room
called
when
I
you
can't
were
remember, man.
uploading
When
all the
I
content
when I take a break, I'll look it up.
You're in the room with the people.
Where they
who are
post the
doing all
grants, but they don't use vocabulary that's like Google searchable. It's called like a TBIP or something.
And I'm sure that's the content that's going to
TBIP.
Yeah, I like.
And an RFP, request for pricing. TBIP is task-based in something plan that you submit to the government. If you search TBIP Canada, that's where you submit stuff. And then she asked if I was incorporated, if I have my own business, and I said I don't, because it needs to. The government needs to give money into like the business bank account and shit. But that's how you do it, man. And I think there's like calls for proposals, and I think you can like submit money there, and that's how you submit money to the government.
You're going to go off on some tangents. You're going to go off on some dead ends. That's
There's like a TBIP structure. I think it's like 16 sections or something. If you Google TBIP, and then there's like a structure breakdown that has all the sections like introduction, methods, cost of materials.
I have seen some of the
Yeah, man, honestly.
in the effort to discredit.
So I'm probably gonna get incorporated. I'm probably gonna get make Lithid Environmental or something. I think I might do Leith Environmental.
which was
Leith,
almost
Leith.
right? But then
I don't know.
that up as if the fact that he was
Leithide is a is a mouthful.
didn't pan out 25 years ago.
And Leith
And
sounds like
that
Leaf.
now discredits
And I'm
everything
Canadian.
that's come since. All the books he's written since then, and so on and so forth.
Yo, thanks, man. Yo,
I
Rib
really
Rose, thanks,
become,
homie. That's so dope of you, bro.
of
Thanks, man.
that tactic being
Yeah, this new
used by
strat is like highway robbery, man.
sending agendas by trying to discredit things that would conflict with those
Lithium,
No, I do,
Lithihead.
yeah.
Yeah, really.
I've seen the same thing too. I was
Maybe we should just name it Lithium Environmental for all the batteries.
basically
Yo, thanks, Rib Rose.
borderline slandering him in the journal.
Yeah, this new dude, I highly
the
recommend
trade
if you play this level,
bags,
play
the
this new
bags,
strat, man. It's like saves a second. It's
couple
crazy.
other people that put together a whole bunch of stuff.
Thanks,
that was,
man.
Would pull up topics like that. I mean, as you say.
Oh, and play full screen.
And this is always
The cameras are bigger.
If you look at, that's how science, that's how all these things work. Like even if you get into the things like the younger Dryas. I mean,
Yeah.
25 years ago, we didn't have any evidence for it other than the the cultural evidence, the
23 is gonna be. This is
historical
23
evidence,
pace.
but it's not only
But I
since
didn't get the photo
2005,
right.
That was after Hancock published Fingerprints of the Gods.
And
the first
that's 24 now.
that sort of explored this the war, not the first, but he really.
Thanks,
drove home
buddy.
the idea of a
How you doing, bro?
global cataclysm that affected humanity. We didn't have any evidence for it, and in that period since now, we've got 200 plus peer-reviewed papers. We've got some very solid science behind it, ideas evolve going forward. I know what you mean, and I'm the same. Like that, you start off with a bunch of ideas, and you refine your thinking and your ideas as you go forward. That's the nature of things. And yeah, I've seen the same tactics used where they'll pull up stuff and you say, you talk about Earth crustal displacement or something from.
That's what I was going to mention.
Yeah, and
In
like.
trying to come up with an explanation,
Oh.
what could have caused a catastrophe in pyramids.
Oh, really? I got stuck after the GoldenEye key? What, on Urumov?
Yeah. Yes.
And that
Or Boris?
still, in my mind, has a lot of merit. I don't think it's necessarily going to be
No, I was on the phone, man.
the entire crust of the globe.
So I was talking to someone on the
I
phone.
don't remember his time,
That's why I paused. Because I was going to turn up the volume,
but
but he was on speakerphone.
and he sees, excuse me, he sees the
And I didn't want him to know that I was playing GoldenEye while I was talking to him on the phone.
I kind of
So that's why I was like,
rapidly accelerated crust.
because you need to hear the key copy sound, right?
In other words, I turn it around.
And I'm like, shit. He hears like the beeping, the beep, 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 and I'm like, fuck.
Have the deglatiation process that involves
It's like he knows already, so I might as well just do it.
redistribution
And then I got it.
and the rapid rising of sea level. So there's a whole isostatic response.
This guy's AC, who what? My AC?
Planetary mass
I got a big ass fan here
results as a consequence of that. The deglatiation.
on my computer.
6 million cubic miles of ice is going to be an extraordinary amount of weight. And when you redistribute
Large
that
cloth
weight,
of pride. What does that
I
mean?
think there's consequences, not only to even to the orbital stability of the Earth. I think there's also ramifications in terms of the cubic and adhesion, which I know is one of the things you wanted to talk about at some point in terms of the shifting of the cubic and north.
I always get stuck on Boris though,
Definitive answer on that?
as in conceit.
But the
Right, as in ego.
suggests to me that
Interesting.
what we're seeing in effect is still it's residual
Yeah, I always get stuck on him.
to what happened during
It's a
the
bitch.
Yeah.
we're still seeing the after effects. The Earth is still trying to return to equilibrium
Yes.
in the aftermath. of
Because it's just, I think it's faster than going around the table. I might be wrong, but
just how extraordinary and extreme and powerful those events were. It almost follows. Yeah, it's going to take some time for stability and equilibrium to be restored to the system.
Yeah, it's a hard idea for people to, and for me as well, to wrap.
This might be
your head
pace.
around it. It's that we tend to think in terms of in timelines. Really,
that stupid
you know,
boost.
we
That
live
boost was
for
so
such a
stupid, man.
short amount of time relative
That was
to
such a stupid
geological
boost.
Cosmic processes, right? right?
It's not
you know,
pace.
so it's and we think, oh, it didn't happen.
Pretty fast 24 though.
It's like
Yo, what's up, monks?
the concept of something that's taking millennia or
Yo, proofread my shit, bro.
to play out is kind of hard.
Did you hear that story I was saying about playing GoldenEye on the phone with you?
We do context and frame a lot of our thinking about these things in terms of the length of human life.
That's funny.
And sort of how long time seems to us. But
I'm sure I know you. I know you heard the GoldenEye. I swear you did.
almost yesterday.
What's up, monks? How you doing, buddy?
This was, where
You caught like half. That's
our
that's
heads are
hilarious,
still
man.
ringing from the blow that we got, I think, the planner.
Oh, of your proofreading, yeah. I will, buddy. I'll do it after. I'll do it later, though.
The
Thanks,
thing
man.
about it is, you know, you could say, well, you know,
That's
it doesn't
funny.
happen. Not something that's happening during our lifetime, and yet it's something that
Matt
did
Monks.
happen during somebody's lifetime.
He's got a mortgage.
It happened.
He's a mortgage specialist, and he has like a blog now about mortgage rates and suggestions on
Perhaps in a
what to
shorter
do
period
and
of time, it's true.
with mortgages and
Yeah,
plans.
that's crazy to think about. It really is.
I recommend him.
And no doubt. we
This is
lived
23.
through it, and this is the event that.
It's 23 right here.
After
What? What a
the
scam!
planet
That's such a
at the time,
scam.
We were part of that, and it's.
No, right.
there's
Worries
the
is right.
evidence with the Y chromosomal bottleneck. It shows that human populations were quite savagely affected across the planet. You know, it's echoed down through cultures and religions. Like
What's up, big bugs?
a serious event. And as we said, like this was something that prior to 2005 we only had that type of anecdotal, I suppose, or religious or cultural evidence for. This was, you know, these tales of catastrophism that come down through religion and
Yo, this is Monksy. This is the DJ.
indigenous wisdom keeping, all these
When we
different
DJ on
methods
Twitch.
and cultures across the world that, you know, as of 2005 we get
He's the
solid
yang
scientific
of the
evidence
music,
that really starts to
the
back
yin
this
and
theory up,
yang
and
of
it's-
trance and
one of the
house.
things that really drew me into this.
But yeah, that's him, that's Monkey, that's Matt.
The GISP data from Greenland, so the ice core samples.
Yes.
This was one of the first real indicators to me that okay, this is solid.
Thanks for being here, man.
That something went on, because if you've seen that graph, and I'll make sure I put it in here, and I know it's in one of your slides.
Yeah, I got it right here. We can hold it up.
Sure, that'd be great, because that's, you know, that was sort of the start of this. It's you now you can see these massive temperature variations amongst other indicators, but temperature being and snow accumulation being one of them, all over the shop. Like you can clearly see the younger dryas, but not just that period, but also before it. There was clearly a tumultuous time happening before it, and then post younger dryas. So after that, you know,
Congrats, man. I'm glad you got it done.
Years, we have that steady rise, and we kind of have a more or less stable system, stable climate that I think has given rise to our civilization and where we are today.
I look at that period. The early 90s was a very auspicious and significant time for me in my research and understanding. Because when I really will see a milestone point in my thinking about all this, the evolution of my thinking was the first publications I'd seen of the oxygen ice from the ice cores. That blew my mind. And I was already thinking about impacts because I got interested in the Carolina Bays in the late 80s. I think I read Henry Savage's book, The Mysterious Carolina Bays, maybe a year or two after it came out.
Scam.
Maybe 87, 88. So I was really fascinated.
They
by
did
the
not.
Carolina Bays. I
Did he?
read
Why, how could he not flee? Did he not? Like, why would he not flee?
one of the scientists on staff over at
Like, there's no way. He was just living his life.
At the time, he was a PhD geologist working on his second PhD in geochemistry. And I made several trips with him.
Should have just left the city, man.
The fall
Somehow.
Range is just south of Macon, right at Macon, Georgia, where
Obviously, he probably might not have a car if he's riding the subway.
the Eocene Oligocene boundary is the layer that the Georgia tektites are found. And the Georgia tektites are the result of the splash apron that fell back to Earth after the impact that has now left its crater on the bottom of Chesapeake Bay, roughly 35 million years ago, and also coincided with not one of the great five, but nonetheless a significant manifestation.
What's that, Matt? I didn't understand. Turn
So
up
I
your
was
buds
down there
volume, the podcast?
and
Sure, I'll do that.
nearby there
Thanks, man.
Carolina Bays. And so he was aware of the Carolina
Each video
Bays.
differs so
I
greatly
got
in terms of volume. It's a moving target. Every video is different. So thanks, I appreciate it.
science that was just woefully underused. So they had it set up. If the idea behind it was, well, we'll make this resource available to like the public or independent researchers or whatever, this science library. And in the late 80s,
Who am I
you didn't
talking
have
to?
digital downloads of pages like you do now. But
No one's talking to me, my man.
they had the whole
It's
interlibrary
the there's a video.
dozens and dozens of university libraries and so on. So I started.
I can turn up the volume of the video. There's a video in the bottom left corner. I don't know if you can see it. It's really small.
I first went there because I had actually read a book about 5 or 6 years earlier called The Secret of Atlantis by Otto Luth.
He sucker punched him first. That's crazy.
That was one of the earlier books I had read. It came out.
Yeah, I say no worries, buddy. Yeah, I'll turn it. I can turn it up.
Maybe it was translated.
No. I can turn that up. It's all good.
I was at that point.
I try to put
Does this deal with Atlantis?
the
Real or not? Or I was.
subtitles.
I started reading a series.
I don't know if you're watching. If you're watching your phone, it's
So
like
Otto
tiny.
Luth's book was one of those that I read.
But
I thought,
if you're on
I wanna get
a computer or TV or something, it's bigger.
one of the
I know.
scientists say,
I try to maximize the space for the game. You know what I mean?
his books for the
I try to maximize the full screen game.
which were interesting. And
I like
interestingly, Ignatius Donnelly, if you've read him or you're familiar with his thesis, he attributes the
LOL. I'll turn it up. I can turn it up.
story of Atlantis being the consequence of a cometary hit
Yep.
way back in
Yep.
3.
Yep.
Okay, so I had read that. Oh,
It's Santa Claus.
interesting idea, comet. And then I got a hold of Luke's book, and he had a chapter in there where he talked about the Carolina Bays. I thought, well, Carolina Bays, hey, they're right in my backyard. So then going back with Ed Albin and going down to these, look for the Georgia Tech heights, somewhere in the conversation, said, you know anything about the Carolina Bays? He says, oh yeah, there's some right down there near the outcrop we're going to be looking at, just south of there. So we made some trips down there and
Monk
explored,
C in
and he
chat.
collected samples from the rim of Carolina Bays. Actually back then and had them tested. And there was some stuff that showed up that looked like the slaggy glass, and it was definitely argon dating showed it was too old to be industrial.
Okay.
Initially, when he had it tested, the professor, he was still doing his coursework in geochemistry. The professor said it was undoubtedly industrial, but if it was industrial, there should be no argon
Oh,
isotopes at
Rob.
all, because
Robbed.
I forget what the half-life of argon is, but it would have taken at least 10,000 years to show traces of argon gas. And guess what? It showed traces of argon gas. So right there, that was when impact possible. And see, that's what
No, I think he
Otto
just-
Luth was theorized. That
I think he thought I was
there
talking
was
to
a
him
breakup of a comet.
for whatever.
He
I don't think he saw the
cited
video.
several of the work, the earlier work,
What?
the controversy that went on between the celestial camp and the terrestrial.
For the Carolina Bays.
Probably familiar with that. Douglas
Let's
Johnson,
here. I'm gonna paste your website in the
was
chat,
the
Matt.
leader of
I can't remember the name of it.
terrestrials,
Huron Mortgages, the Facebook. I'm gonna paste your website.
which you know the
HuronMortgages.com.
hypothesis
No,
Hobby.
not specifically by that name.
Oh, it's the solution Artesian lacustrine Aeolian hypothesis.
It's Monksy's website.
Repeat that after me now.
Atresian.
His face. I'll put his Facebook too. It's gonna be a mobile link because I'm on mobile, but
The Artesian
you
solution.
should follow
lacustrine
his
Aeolian
Facebook. He's
hypothesis.
posting
It's basically
videos
everything in the kitchen sink
and
to explain the anomalies of the Carolina
he's
Bays.
posting
I mean, we could break it
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, the wind. It's the wind, and
An
it's
article?
all these other terrestrial
Articles,
processes
an
put
article
together
tomorrow.
that
talking about
that-
how
that
interest rates
can
are going to
potentially
change. In the,
result in
I'm not going
these
to.
rates.
I'm not going to
I'm
spoil
aware
it.
that's the
About interest
alternative,
rates
explanation
Yeah.
for them.
and when's the right time to buy a house and
The
stuff,
main problem with that, though, is you
or
can't
decide
cite
what to do with your
anywhere in the
house
world
or
today where
apartment
you're
or
like,
whatever.
See, look, there it is.
and your
We
money.
see one forming right there. You know, we've been monitoring for 50 years now and see it's an
G
incipient
talking
thing.
interstellar shit.
We don't see that.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Right. And
So-
that's been the mainstay. That's been how a lot of geology has tried to explain a lot of these things, is like pointing at processes that are in place today. It's part of that swing against catastrophism and whatnot.
Yes.
In general.
So,
You know what's really interesting
I actually went down there with a buddy
is
of
that
mine,
Quills
not
TV.
Dr. Albin, but somebody
he-
else kind of was also interested.
He's
We
in
went
the
down and
he's
we
come to the conclusion
hired a
that
pilot, and
they
we
did
flew
not
over
have
since about
advanced
90,
like electric machines or
maybe
gas
89,
machines.
right
They
around
did
in
it
there.
all by hand, more or
flew
less.
over the Caroline Bays. I
And we had a
photographs
long
that I took,
discussion, really
from
interesting
the air
discussion on it.
Carolina-
Because I'm not saying I know, I
Georgia
don't know,
bays. Now these are the
but
Georgia
I think
bays.
it still
And,
could
of
be a
course, the works
mystery.
that I had
He
read
showed
by
someone make a
Douglas Johnson,
granite
William
or a
Crowley,
diorite bowl, a small diorite bowl.
Shriver, was it Shriver? Anyways,
Yep.
the early authors, there was MacDonald, there was a number of these early authors, you know.
What did you feel when you
Mostly
went for that
focusing
for a run
on
that was
the,
off and made you
the
seek
bays in
medical
North and
advice?
South
Oh wow!
Carolina,
You saw
right?
the video, thanks Toad.
Which tend to be,
I haven't seen the video yet because I was
much more
on.
eccentric-
I was speaking to him on
eccentric-
my phone,
eccentric.
and it
You
wouldn't.
know,
The mic- the
you
mic
know,
wouldn't
the
play the
ratio of
video
the
for
long
me.
axis, the major axis, the semi-minor axis, you know, so they're flat and they're pretty
One
elongated.
sick
right?
baseball player,
But as
great
you shift
shortstop,
around,
staying shortstop,
and you come around to Georgia, the axis
third
not
hitter,
only
fourth hitter,
shifts
second hitter,
direction, but the
Fifth hitter.
the bays themselves flatten out and become much rounder.
Okay.
So I was very curious about that. So my interest in the bays goes back to the late 80s, right? It was triggered by reading this book by Otto Moog called The Secret of Atlantis, which and his whole thesis in that book, which I'm pretty sure was translated in 1980, was that there was a catastrophe that caused the destruction of an island civilization in the Atlantic, and the trigger of the catastrophe was an impact. And a commentary.
What's up, Rib Roast? If you're still here,
Ignatius
you're doing well.
Yeah.
and credited him with the idea.
Hope you're playing
And
GoldenEye.
in his model, the comet was breaking up as it came in, and the fragments came down. And his thesis was that the main core of the comet fell into the Atlantic Ocean,
Right.
and it was that impact that caused the seismic response that resulted in the sinking of Atlantis.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of where, that's where I really see an important phase of my concept of all this really kind of taking shape. Then the Greenland ice cores came out in about 92. Now, one other thing I should mention was that late at night, one night, I'm sitting there looking at maps. I've procured a whole bunch of U.S. Geological Survey maps, right? And I've got them spread out on the table, and I'm looking and I'm figuring, and okay, what's the orientation, and and I'm seeing, okay, well, if Mook is right, then we have these depressions, elliptical depressions. They have prominent sand rims on the southeast,
Right.
as if there was the force pushing them right.
It was angular.
And
yeah.
so with the orientation of the bays themselves, the prominent south rims, the assumption was that the object, if it was an object, fragmenting, came in from the northwest. So I pulled out my maps. I got a map of North America, and I plotted. In North and South Carolina, the orientation of the long axis is very close to 45 degrees, northwest, southeast. So I just took my ruler and I laid on there and I drew, and it went up right over Canada, and that line led right up to the Arctic coastal plain of Alaska. And I drew that line, and I thought, okay, now if the Carolina bays were formed 10, 11, 12, 13,000 years ago, if Luke is right, then the bays would have formed during the latter part of the Ice Age. So there would have been an ice sheet, an ice cap
On top of that.
on top. So now I look back, I pull out some of the graphics that had already been done by that point, showing, and I actually can pull up the slides here in a minute to show the very ones I was looking at, and realize that the trajectory of the incoming objects would have brought it right over the ice sheet. So I'm thinking, okay, well now, is there any evidence of anything unusual about happening to the ice sheets, right?
Yeah.
Well, about the same time, I read another book by Cedric Leonard on Atlantis. I read about 5 or 6 books on Atlantis because I was trying to get the picture of whether there was any credible evidence there, or whether it was all just New Age silliness, or what was it. So the book by Cedric Leonard had a couple of things in it that were valuable. One, it had a chapter called The Catastrophe of 10,000 BC. So he's clearly, and this book is 78, 79, 80, something like that. I read it right around the time I read Mook's book, right? So that was one thing. And he marshaled some of the evidence there for, catastrophe in 10,000 BC, which would be 12,000 years ago, right? Yep. The other thing is he had several pages devoted to the Channel Scabland.
Nice.
Now, this was the first time I'd heard of the Channel Scabland, but unbeknownst to me, and I realized then as I was reading about it, that I had
think that
seen
should
it,
be my
that I had
strat.
been there, that I had traversed it.
Just
in
spam the first cam, one shot the second, and one shot the fourth. I think it's going to be my best hope.
The year after I was out of high school, and traveled down
I aim there.
through the Columbia Gorge, which the whole Columbia Gorge that cuts through the Cascade is just sculpted into these fantastic forms, and deltas and strand lines and waterfalls.
Maybe a couple
and things
there.
that are
Maybe
all
a
the
couple
product
there.
of these tremendously
3,
cataclysmic
2,
floods sweeping
and
through
2
there
maybe.
and the icing. So been through there, did that traverse down, coming back, came across, what is it, 94 in there? Coming back across the Scablands. I was not too impressed because I didn't really know what I was seeing, although I just remember it was kind of a bizarre, kind of a lunar-like landscape.
Yeah.
But you know, back then, man, I was of the mind, I'm seeing these landscapes
Scam.
that are blowing my mind, and at that time, my framework of thinking was that, God, something's here, but there's no way I could ever know what it was.
Right.
There's no way I could ever understand what this is. That was 1970. 10 years later, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to form this picture, right? So I read Cedric Leonard's book. He had the section in there on the Scablands and the Missoula floods, these huge floods in Washington, and I'm going, oh, bingo, yeah. 10 years ago, I was there and was across that landscape. Didn't really know what I was seeing, but it impressed the hell out of me, particularly that traverse down to Columbia. That was just awesome. If you've ever done that through the Cascades there, the gorge where it comes through,
Yeah.
that's a sight to behold. And then when you know the story behind the creation of those landforms that you're looking at,
It gives me chills now just thinking about it. I mean, because you just looking at that landscape is and trying to imagine what happened.
Trying to imagine.
Relative. Yeah, it's a
So that was about the period where I'm thinking, okay, was there anything that happened? So I began researching, and I would do this. I would get into some stuff. Like when I was researching the Carolina
Come
Bays,
on, man.
I got Henry Savage's book, and he had a bibliography, and he even stated he was trying to get everything that there was written on the Carolina Bays up to that point, right? So I said, okay, my goal now is to read every single thing in his bibliography.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, the librarian there got really intrigued by my work and my research. And she would be coming around, because I'm coming in here and I'm getting these old volumes and I'm sitting at the table poring over this stuff. And sometimes there's nobody else in there. It's like I said, it was supposed to be a public resource. And here I come in, I'm one lone member of the public coming in, right? So I kind of got the treatment,
Yep.
a member of the public doing some research. Okay, this is what we're here for. So,
Purpose fulfilled.
yeah, so 3 or 4 years I spent there, 3, 4, 5 times a week, get done with work, head over there, and I would come in with, some list of references. She would take it. It would go out onto the network, 1, 2, sometimes 3 weeks later, papers would come in, from the Netherlands, from your area, from who knows, from all over the place, right? So I was getting all of this stuff and just pouring over it and worked my way through most of Henry Savage's bibliography. So by the time I got to the end of it, I was pretty well convinced that the Carolina bays were the result of a cosmic impact.
Right.
And
What?
the analog that I found that I thought really explained it the closest in our modern experience was the Tunguska event of 19.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, right. So, so it went from there. So I would say that by 92 or 93, I was pretty much at that point beginning to think in terms, well, okay, so let me just fill in one gap.
Sure.
The question that rose in my mind was, well, is there evidence for something unusual or catastrophic happening to the ice sheet? So that's when I began. Now, I've read through everything I could find on the Carolina bays. Now I began really looking at everything I could find on ice, the glaciers, the extent of the glaciers, the deglaciation process. That's when I started getting into the mega floods. I set out, got my bibliography of the Channel Scablands work, got all of J. Harlan Bretz's work.
That's what I need. That's what I need my second cam to be.
So by
Literally that.
93, I'm going already beginning to think. I don't know if this makes sense. This idea of repeated outbursts, floods from glacier-dammed lakes, and thinking maybe we should be looking at the idea of impacts into the ice sheet.
Yeah.
So that's the idea.
Yo, Cloud9, what's up, Broski?
Then in March of 96.
What pace is this?
96.
Is this
gave
23?
5 lectures at Warren Wilson College. And they
Probably
are
24.
recorded.
Okay.
I'm spelling out the
Wow,
whole
insane.
basically Younger Dryas impact hypothesis in that lecture.
Wow.
We're talking about Tunguska as an analog for understanding it, the KT impact for discovering it, talking about the mass extinction, talking about the extreme meltwater floods. That was 96. So
Yeah, if I can get a better second
got
cam, that would
documented.
save like a
It was,
second, honestly.
like 6 hours.
If I can just do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
It's less consistent, but it's pretty much right at the start of the run.
You have put together the macro picture in a lot of ways, like the large scale evidence for this.
And I'll improve.
That's how I kind of view your work, and it's a whole different discipline and a whole different angle to a lot of the scientific work and the papers that have come out since really look at the micro evidence, because there's evidence for this on both scales. There's these nano diamonds and shock synthesized particles and all of the extraterrestrial platinum, all these little impact proxies and that are in the ground in the strata layers. There's that side of it, and those are datable because of the strata layers that they've found at, and they found it actually turns out a lot of archaeological sites that in North America in particular, but on many continents. But the other aspect to it, and where your work is really this macro evidence, the evidence for mega floods, the evidence for ice impacts. It's just it all comes together, and that's an interesting way of putting it. So with the Carolina bays, I kind of want to circle around. That isn't. I mean, it's almost. I consider that almost like splash damage from this impact, and it was such a tremendous impact, likely into an ice sheet, that it ejected that those bays were formed by ice. Is that you're on board with? Is that how you think about those today too, or?
Still straddling the fence. That's Tony's Morris idea, and I know Tony. We've communicated, we've hung out, and I've watched his demonstrations of how it can work.
Yep.
And what I'm going to say is it's really interesting. I'm not convinced yet. For me, I really have to wrap my head around it.
Right.
Think about it more. I still tend to lean towards a Tunguska model because looking at some of the concept, and we can pull that up in a minute. I mean, when you look at the Tunguska area in the swamps,
Like that.
That aerial detonation.
See, let's see how fast this is. This is 23 pace. Because that one camera, that second cam,
Carolina Bay.
is 23 pace. Watch.
Yeah.
And those were from atmospheric detonations.
Even this shitty run is gonna be 23.
Intersecting the surface of the Earth in an angle.
If I can see, because of that second camera, watch.
I know that Tony's idea has gotten some harsh criticism from some other guys I know.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's an
that's gonna be
interesting idea, and it's an idea
See what you
that
mean?
I can
Thanks, man.
actually
I know I was
entertain,
kind of going crazy.
Kind of dismissed it.
But, like, as I was
Okay.
thinking, how am I going to friggin'
Mainly I
shave
probably dismissed it because
a
I was
second?
thinking I didn't have the conceptual framework, the detailed knowledge to decide whether it was credible or not.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
This is like 10 years ago. Anyway. So
Yeah,
I
this new
kinda
strat's pretty
put
good,
the
dude.
idea on the shelf, and then
New strat's friggin' amazing.
encountered Tony's. And
Yeah,
so
it's-
that kind of brought that idea back.
It's
She
super interesting to
goes.
me that the way that they look at the axes for these, all of the Carolina and people should know that there's
I remember
definitely
in
hundreds of
Vice
thousands
City,
of
I was
them.
like, dude, just put the
Not
cheats
just in
in.
the
Just put the
Carolinas.
cheats in, dude.
They're also called the
put the
Missoula
cheats in.
rainwater basins.
And you're like, no.
And they all and there was that one study did
And I
that
would start pasting the
calculated it
cheats into
by
the
lining
chat.
up the axes, the long axes of all of these bays, and you
Idiot.
calculated this of thousands of them.
You're like,
And-
no, I
and-
don't
but
want to do
also
that.
taking
That's not
into
the point of the
account
game.
Coriolis effect, given that if you consider that the origin point was
That was
somewhere around
funny.
Saginaw Bay. So the idea, I think his idea is as a
Oh yeah,
back
because I
there
think he
to
had
the
to
ice
go.
sheet,
I think he had to
and
go
then
pretty
the-
long
the
distance. I
ejector is
think he had to
essentially what
traverse the
causes,
entire map, and I'm like, dude,
Carolina
just
Bays.
fly.
It's
I think he's referred to it as the ice boulder hypothesis.
ice boulder hypothesis.
Oh my god.
Its result
Too
is
much.
familiar with Zamora's work. I was the first. I didn't know about the Nebraska.
That was funny. That was good. Good
The
times.
Nebraska rainwater basins.
Yeah. Now that
See,
is
that was not a good second
very
camera.
interesting piece of
That was like that camera.
one thing, like you just say.
I gotta change that
axes
strat.
of these Nebraska bays, they're oriented kind of to the northeast. So
Northeast.
when you draw lines, they converge on the Saginaw Bay area.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know. But it's
You're so bad in a way.
one of those things that I think
Nice,
it's
buddy.
a hell of an important thing to eventually find out.
Yeah.
Practicing off right. I
What
hear
are we
you.
going to find out? We're going to find out that the Carolina,
I hear
now
ya.
there's some guys doing work out there that are saying, well, they're impact produced, but they were produced like 100,000 years ago.
Right, yeah, the time frame's off. It's what George Howard calls the kooky caboose to the Younger Dryas theory. In terms, the dating of it is kind of they're still working. I think there's a lot of work to be done looking into the center of those. Like, is there any particles they can find at the center of these bays to prove out these hypotheses? And then there's the dating aspect, because one of the things Tony does show is that there's the flipping over of strata. Like as a result of that impact, you have older layers that end up on top of younger layers. You know,
And that's
as it's
common
flipped.
during impacts.
Right,
You
exactly.
find that at Meteor Crater in Arizona.
Which-
Exactly that. Overturned.
Yeah. What seems to be certain is that they seem to be impact caused and not, wind and sand and erosion and all the other the list of terms that I can't pronounce.
Yeah, the Artesian solution, Lacustrine Aeolian hypothesis.
That one. Yeah.
That one. That's what you're trying to say.
Yes, indeed. Trying to
But
say
that was, Douglas Johnson was the dean of geomorphology. I believe it was at Columbia University. So he
Insane. That was
considered,
I was 23.
the big cheese of that, prestigious professor, and he led the charge against these cosmic impact heresy boys that were really led by William Browder, who, I don't know, he might have been a professor at a two-year college or something.
right.
But as it turned out, Douglas Johnson's theory fell apart eventually in the 60s. I don't know if we want to get into why,
No.
but it was the solution part of this idea. Basically, didn't hold up. And, because in his very briefly,
Okay.
you had an artesian spring coming up. It's all limestone terrain. dipping
That's
towards
makes
the
perfect.
south.
Thanks, bro.
Yep.
Oh, you're talking cloud, yeah.
So you picture it's got this tilt, and you have the an artesian spring coming in, right? Okay. Now, what's happening is that the spring is flowing along.
I think I have to watch more cutscene now that I'm not.
There's a cap rock
I'm just doing a
in
faster second cam.
Flowing in a zone of weakness, probably between two bedding planes in the limestone. It's
What?
flowing, and then it gets to an aperture or conduit to the surface. So it actually creates, in a way, kind of like an upside down waterfall.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Now, that's the artesian part of the theory. Now, it's going up like this,
That.
think of a waterfall. If it's flowing over the rim, the limestone rim, you know, limestone is carbonate rock, so it's going to be it's going to dissolve in acidic waters. Okay, so
Still too
going
early.
like this, what's going to happen to the?
Gotta watch more
rim here?
cutscenes.
It's going to recede.
Yeah.
See, as the water eats it and watches. Well, turn it upside down, right? So now it's coming like this. But it's
I watched
still
too much
receding
cutscene there.
upward. And that creates this elongated aperture in the limestone bedrock, right? So now, what you've done is there's the artesian and the solution, right? Now lacustrine means lake.
Right.
So the water has come up and it's made a lake, a pond, body of water. But we don't have a bay yet. We got to bring in the wind.
Right.
That's the eolian. So now the wind is blowing and the waves shape the shoreline into this perfectly elegant elliptical shape. So there it is.
Yeah.
So if anybody out there listening, if you want to impress your friends, go back, you can say the artesian solution lacustrine eolian hypothesis. If anybody ever brings up and wants to know about the origin of the bays, you can cite that. And if you can say all that and put it together, it'll impress the hell out of you. And after all, isn't that why we do this, to impress people?
It must be. Yeah. I guess at the just at the barbecues and whatnot. I tend to
Yeah.
it doesn't always work out, but
But here's the problem. Here's why it's. Since I went through all that, I might as well go another 20 or 30 seconds.
yeah, please.
The reason his theory was quietly discredited and put on the shelf in the late 60s was they started doing surveys of the basins of the bays, and they discovered that in all of the basins that they looked at, you went through a layer of organic material, which was extracted and in many cases radiocarbon dated. Most of the interesting, a lot of those radiocarbon dates, in fact, the majority of them,
Heartbreaking.
coming up in as
Heartbreaking.
late Pleistocene. So which would put it right in that window of right. But the other thing is at the bottom, and I could even pull up, I have the quotes right here, I could pull up, show you some of the studies that were done. And basically, under Johnson's hypothesis, there should be this elongated conduit where the water, there was nothing like you pull out all of the organic material that had filled in, accumulated since the whatever process excavated those basins originally. You pull out all the accumulated organic material, and now you had this hard packed material they called humic, and it was actually been described as being almost like baked clay.
Man,
But
that
guess
third
what?
camera is pretty close.
It was solid. There was no
Getting pretty close to that third
aperture
cam.
that would have been created by this solution of artesian waters in any of them.
Okay.
And so Douglas Johnson's big toe on the origin of the Carolina Bays kind of got quiet.
Like, no, come on.
Yeah.
And where was it going? So what did that do? Well, that opened the door to a reconsideration of the celestial hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It is. It's and it's not it doesn't seem to be an area.
Takes
that
longer breaks from
debate
streaming
doesn't
Mirror
seem to
Cloud.
get a lot of
Aw.
mainstream attention at the scientific that I've seen. It's
No, they don't.
it's there's still like something of an enduring mystery as to how they formed, and they're remarkable. I mean, with modern lidar and things now, we're seeing more and more just how prevalent they are in that area too. It was a full-blown saturation bombardment, and I think it fits in the overall concept of macro evidence for these cataclysmic times that we've been through. And we spend a lot of time, and I know on your podcast you guys have been looking at some of the evidence in North America, but I know this.
Yeah, these runs are
there's
getting
evidence
way
of this
better.
catastrophic
Like,
flooding
way better.
all over the world.
Oh,
Like
boo.
It's not
All
just.
over the world.
I mean, it definitely there's I think
Like, significantly
because
better.
of the Laurentide and the ice sheet situation in Americas, we have
Was that
some very
22?
strong evidence and big signs of it. But this was a
Yo,
global
what's up,
event.
man? My
and
dust? How you doing?
I don't know if you have some other examples of kind of the evidence for this catastrophic flood in other parts of the world, but that was another topic I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. you find that evidence of
What's
really
up, Emily?
catastrophic
How you doing?
floods, I mean, orders of magnitude larger than anything from modern times, is found pretty much all over the world. But that doesn't mean now necessarily that it's all the same flood.
Right.
I want to issue that disclaimer. Because one of the reasons science has resisted
We miss you,
this,
Cloud.
let me say,
We miss
it was
you, bro.
the old diluvialism,
Bro.
which was what we found in the early 19th century up until about mid-19th century, when all of the founders of geology, for the most part, all believed in catastrophes.
Right.
Because they're looking at the landscape now without the lens of gradualist dogma. And they're seeing, boulders that are displaced miles and miles from their places of origin. They're seeing what they call the boulder clay, which is these vast deposits of stuff that is largely now attributed to the work of glacial action. And that became sort of the idea that, this is how we get rid of the deluge, is we
Streaming on
find
Kick.
these anomalous deposits that are in the valleys, they're on the hillsides, they're spread all over. Bouldery, clay, gravel, sand, everything all jumbled together.
Yeah,
in
that's
these
awesome,
layers.
Toad.
And to a large extent, it was the work of glacier.
Easy to become affiliate. Wow,
About
insane.
halfway. And see, what they did was they basically were able to get away from the deluge by attributing it all to glaciers. And in those days, now we're getting to the latter part of the 19th century, when the gradualist dogmas were really pretty much taking
75, wow.
academic. See,
That's a
once
lot.
geology became academically established discipline. Thank you. And you had dogmas that were then contrived.
I also have a Kick
And
account.
when those dogmas were created, one of the things that
Kick.com/GYGES. No Z.
was breaking science away from the biblical straitjacket.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you had was the classic
5 hours can spread out over a
idea of
year.
that. We're going to get rid
Oh,
of
wow,
this
that's
deluge,
crazy.
So we're going to contribute all of this
How the heck
stuff
are we gonna
to
get
the work
70
of
freaking
glaciers,
5 followers?
And now we can pretty much assume from studies of modern glaciers that we're looking at tens of thousands of years of geomorphic work, right? Whereas if it was a Noahide flood, we're looking at 40 days and 40 nights, and then maybe 100 days, I think, from the whole duration of the flood, and it was one of
Aw, thanks, Toad.
well, you can kind of understand
Because of
the
you.
motive of these guys wanting to get away from the constrictions of the biblical model.
Yeah.
So what they did, though, was they completely pushed aside any ideas of great floods. And it wasn't until J. Harlan Brett's revived.
It's true. It also took me a year and a half to become affiliate.
Slowly began to work
Insane.
its way back into the scientific
And you were there. You were there the
Yeah,
whole
no, it
year and a
took
half.
30
I appreciate it,
years.
my man.
Yeah, and he was vindicated almost on his deathbed by the time he was.
And
That's
Cloud
that
and
famous
everyone.
quote from him. Is just like the only thing he regrets is that none of his critics were around to actually witness it.
Yeah, he was granted the Penrose Medal, which is sort of like the Academy Award of your geological profession.
It's
And
too
I think
slow.
he was like 94, 95 or something when he got that finally.
It's too slow.
But yeah, his only regret was that all of his critics weren't still around for him to gloat over.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I'm sure that's the thing. It's these anyone that in a lot of these areas, and this happens in archaeology as well too. It's the whole Clovis doctrine. There's guys that have challenged that have been laughed out of conferences, and
Yeah.
there's more and more evidence piling up now that there were obvious signs of human occupation, the bluefin caves, things like that go beyond the Clovis boundary. That
Right.
yeah, I mean, and I think in geology wasn't that there was a stated goal for something like 50 or 60 years that everything had to be explained by uniformitarianism and gradualistic processes, the gentle erosional features that we see in process today. Was that the case? Like they would literally
Yes.
go to whatever lengths you need to explain things. And I think one of your old demonstrations you were talking, I think it was like a land gap or something, that is like you had to the sort of the hills had to rise at the same rate at which the water ate away the valley, and that's the only way that you end up with this feature. It's like this
The water gaps.
crazy water gaps, a crazy
Yeah.
convoluted explanation, when a far more elegant one is that, well, actually, a big flood could have caused this.
Damn, that was close.
Right. And yeah, that's exactly right. So, and still, this is.
I lost you, Randall, on the video.
You still hear my? Okay.
I can hear you. You're back.
I'm back now.
Yep.
Okay. I think it was. Oh yeah, it was that. I think it was that meteorite that went over and exploded, interrupted our transmission.
I hear a loud noise.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to navigate around to show. I thought since we've been talking about the bays, we should look at a few images.
That'd be great. Gotcha. Yep.
Here we go. You're seeing it.
I am. Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so here's our North American map, and I'm just going to point out that the bays, this is the coastal plain region, this dark green right here. I think okay.
Yep.
Coastal plain it's pretty much sandy sediments. Almost all of that coastal plain was built through the erosion of the early Appalachian Mountains, right? Which were at one time equivalent to the Himalayas, believe it or not. But they have been worn down. You know, I think the tallest ones are 6,000, maybe 7,000 feet above sea level.
Yeah.
But all of that material is essentially, the pulverized material is now forming the coastal plain of the southeastern United States. And so it's not a highly lithified material. It's still basically unconsolidated. And so the bays actually show up along.
Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy. Thanks, man. I'll follow you back after stream.
They extend down, and
I
see
will, I
there's
swear.
an area. You can see this kind of lowland area here.
Yep.
There's a whole cluster of bays.
Thanks, buddy.
The Georgia bays in that area right there. Interesting. So if it was an impact, the Saginaw Basin is right up here. Isn't it right here?
No drama, man. Cool.
Let's see.
Well said.
Maybe? I'm not sure.
No, it's here.
These runs are looking way better.
I think here it is. Yeah, this is it right here. So Tony's theory is that there was an impact here, and the splash apron came down over all of this area.
And Nebraska.
And in Nebraska out here. See, so he's showing that the rainwater basins of Nebraska, their axis is oriented towards Saginaw. So, but the idea would be that even though there would have been whether it was, let's say, whether it's ice boulders falling back to Earth, whether it was aerial detonations along the lines of Tunguska, the idea is that the coastal plain was the matrix that was conducive to the preservation.
Yes.
Once you get up into the Piedmont, where you've got hard, gravelly, because the Carolina Bays have been described as deflation hollows. Well, a deflation hollow is where you have a hollow in the ground that was created by wind blowing. Right, blowing a sandy material out.
Yep.
That's what you call a deflation hollow. So originally, I wouldn't say originally, but along in the controversies that went on, they were described as deflation hollows, and that the hollows originally formed from wind. Like after the collapse of Douglas Johnson's theory, there were several others. There was one guy who wrote another book in the probably mid to
In
late
one shot
70s
each? Thanks,
called
buddy.
The Origin of the Carolina Bays, where he attempts to explain them as a result of primary.
Oh, I don't know, man.
I read that book.
Go with your heart. Follow your heart.
Anyways, so the idea is that the bays are preserved along in here. They go as far north as Virginia. In fact,
there's also avocado
up even
oil
north
or
of
avocado fat.
But the greatest
That's more.
concentration is right
That's
along
more like
here,
a
north and south
fatty.
Carolina, in the coastal plain region.
More like a grease.
And they're called bays.
Olive
because
oil,
of the
I don't know,
trees
man.
that grow there, the bay trees. They're not actual like bays, inlets in the ocean coastline. So this is Savage, 1982. In 1930, Myrtle Beach Estates.
Is that what I would, dude? I don't know. I would use like Irish Spring off the shelf.
In Horry County, South Carolina, had engaged
Whatever's in Irish Spring is what I would use. As you said, it's like animal fat, I think.
In the Myrtle Beach area. When
Pretty
the photo
horrific.
runs had been flown and the prints developed, a Fairchild engineer in the company's New York office, Edwin H. Corlett, noted the presence of numerous mystifying elliptical features, some small, some very large, all possessing such an amazing geometrical perfection that they seemed artificial, particularly some that seemed to be marching in rank across the wooded plain heading towards the ocean stream. And this is the mosaic that Edwin H. Corlett put together and said, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
Those
maybe you
exact
should use a
words.
plant, honestly. Try using a
Documented,
plant-based, I would recommend.
Podcast.
That just sounds so terrible.
This was,
Bacon to make soap?
1930. So this is,
That's what I mean,
think,
dude.
The first aerial survey of
It's
this
like
region.
fucking Fight Club.
Must have been.
Yeah.
Fight Club shit, bro.
And the marching in rank. Here's a topographic map where you can see. Here's like marching.
Bacon
in
is
rank.
such low quality fat,
That-
especially
you
the
know,
fat.
You gotta admit,
Such
that's a
low
pretty
quality.
interesting phenomenon.
It really is. Yeah. and
Whatever
it's-
cost it.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
And see, you've got notice this one. You have no real prominent rim here, but you've got this.
Prominent rim on the southern side, right? It's
Yeah, and same here, same
Which-
here.
which
Almost
is
as if.
what does Tony
Damn,
say?
I'm
Like
pretty
a
close with
conical-
that.
It's like a sectional of a cone. Like
Oh
it's
my
suggestive
God.
of an angular impact into the ground.
Yes.
Not like straight.
Yo,
down.
Monksy.
Yeah. Oh, Melton and Schreiber. Yeah.
Hello.
They were the first to. So.
Hello.
Corlett. Let's see. I think it was Schreiber.
I think he pocket-
Or was it Melton? I don't remember.
I think he pocket
Anyways,
dialed me.
They knew each other. So Corlett contacted them and said, "Hey, come take a look at this. I want you to tell me what's going on."
I'm gonna put bacon.
So
into
he
the
did, and he brought in one of his associates. I think Schreiber was the older one. And
That's
Melton-
gross.
I've forgotten exactly. Anyways, let's look at the title. The Carolina Bays, Are They Meteorite Scars? Journal of Geology back in 1933. And, they're just going into some of the background.
Right, like that third camera's actually. I haven't hit it yet.
A
but
careful study of the photographs showed that the origin of these bays involved problems of extraordinary interest, to which I concur. Salters Lake Bay, Bladen County, North Carolina. Note the peat bog encroaching upon the lake and the small bay on the northwest. And notice this bay right here. You'll see how it's the rim of the larger one overlaps the rim of the small one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that's very typical impact phenomena that you would see,
It's overlapping,
because
yeah.
the younger of the two impacts will be the one. So in other words, when this larger one formed, the smaller one was already there.
Yep.
If it was the reverse, then you would see the completed rim of the small one.
Yeah. Hard to correlate that with Aeolian processes.
Well,
right?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, okay, so there we go. This is 1 2/3 miles to give people a sense of the scale. Well, you can see the roads in here.
You should see how, I don't know if you've got some of the LiDAR imagery that they have nowadays, which just see
I
through
do,
the.
it's coming up. Bladen County
that.
mosaic,
It's great.
and here you can really see the
Overlapping
overlap.
bays.
Oh, okay, and this is what I call ghost bays. So this
Yeah.
is this is exactly what you see as you're getting up off the coastal plain, is that the bays begin to fade out.
Right.
Which suggested to me, you see this right here? Like, look at this. This is what I'm calling a ghost bay. And so, as you go further east up the Piedmont, they disappear completely. But they don't stop all at once. They fade out. But they're
Right.
most prominent where you have the unconsolidated sandy coastal plains, where an imprint would be most readily made. So then they go on to say, referring to the sketch, one sees that the probable area of bombardment includes most of the southern Appalachians. Thus, the numerous meteorite discoveries in this region may be additional evidence of the reality of the shower, which the authors have assumed. And then, let's see. Okay, so this was the map that was done by William Prouty in 1952. So all of those speckles are bays, the key map. Now, in 1952, Prouty was the leader of the Celestials, the group that was arguing for some type of a cosmic bombardment or celestial impact type event. Douglas Johnson was the leader of the terrestrials.
Right.
And the complex hypothesis, which it was called for short, right? Never mind.
Come on.
The old adage of people like Thomas Kuhn and others that the best science, or even Carl Sagan or whoever, they've been saying it for years that the best scientific hypothesis is always the simplest one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it definitely fits in that box, this stuff.
Bays are geographically restricted to the coastal plain area between southern New Jersey and northwestern Florida, with most of the bays in the two Carolinas and northeastern Georgia. Bays have no relationship to geological formations, geological age, or topography. Some bays are on interstream flatlands, others on valley slopes, or older stream terraces, and a few on the older portion of the present floodplain of streams. So, in other words, because of the geologic and geomorphic diversity of the terrains that they're found, it becomes very difficult to invoke some type of
terrestrial process.
Right, exactly. And here is the diagram. I think that it was Prouty that came up with this.
Yep.
Right. Here you see this line, the fall line that heads on up. So the fall line is where it transitions from Piedmont to coastal plain settlements.
Put bacon
So
into the soap for
this
the
map
authentic
that I
scent.
used,
Jesus.
This basic map that I used to project onto the globe, and realized that if this was impact coming in from the northwest, that they would have passed right over the ice sheet.
Yeah.
The similarity of development and the condition of preservation of bays in all parts of the Bay country seem to indicate that they are all about the same age. Elliptical sand-rimmed bays are not being formed anywhere in the world at the present time, as far as known. Most bays are associated with other bays of slightly different age. These associated bays frequently overlap. And then I'd point out that the area to the northwest of the known Bay country has yielded more meteorites than any other equal area in the United States.
Yeah. I think that's
Bottom
what they needed to
samples from the deeper part of some of the bays in Bladen County, North Carolina, taken from beneath the peat deposits, show a thickness of several feet of light-colored silt, which, according to D.W. Wells, is of wind-blown character. The deposition of silt over the coarse bottom sand shows that the bays were formed suddenly and were soon filled with water. Then followed sedimentation from a wind-swept, barren area. And Melton and Schreiber state the obvious fact that the bays, if they are of meteoric origin, must be no older than the youngest formations in which they occur. These bays clearly cut beach ridges developed on late Pleistocene terraces. And so here you've got, look, you see these kind of striation lines in here?
Yeah, that's
Those
what
are
they're talking
ancient
about.
beaches.
Okay.
So whenever these beaches were formed, they were before the bays formed, because look, the bays are clearly juxtaposed upon them.
What a scam.
And intersecting, right?
Yes, they.
In other words, you don't see the beaches running
on top
through
of
the
the
bays.
bays. Yeah.
Exactly. So what this is it doesn't give you any absolute dates, but it does give you a relative date. Yeah.
Big scam run. Everything I was every single thing I was scammed on.
Yeah. There we go. There's some LiDAR stuff now.
Oh yeah.
And I forget I'm drawing a blank here. when we had the round table out in Carolina a few years ago with George Howard.
Yep. Yep.
We got to see, and I should have, if I knew we were going to talk about this, I could have found the link. The man who's doing the really great work with the line.
Yeah.
It's amazing stuff. Yeah.
Right.
But here it is. Here you can see the old river channels.
Yeah. Yeah. Saturation bombardment. Crazy.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been pleasant being around.
Dude.
Well, and then Tony is saying that he thinks it may have been a contributor to the actual megafauna extinction in that area. Like that's.
Oh.
I don't think there's much that would have lived through it.
It was bombardment, whether it was Tunguska-like or ice boulders, like
Either
Tony
way.
says, it would have been profoundly catastrophic.
Yeah. Well, I think they should be. I mean, it seems like a good candidate to like go and find if it's. I mean, impact, even whether it's, I guess, aerial, like the atmospheric explosion model. You probably aren't going to have like bits of extraterrestrial material like in the center of these bays, but if you.
Right.
If I'm sure it can't all have been that way. There might have been some that were actual impacts, and you think that'd be something that you could go and try and dig for and look for in the center of these bays.
Oh, brutal.
But yeah,
That's so terrible.
macrometeorite material has not been found, but micrometeorite material has been found in cave rings.
Yeah. Well, and are they looking for magnetic spherules and things? I think there's
Well, yeah, and I've got some work on that. So these are and you notice here, when we're looking at the Georgia bays, they're much rounder.
Yes.
See there?
Yeah.
Now, if it would meet meteoritic, I would speculate that the eccentricity of the ellipses is dependent upon the angle of approach.
Right.
So, as you get more towards the perpendicular, the bays are going to get rounder.
Rounder. Yeah.
Yes.
The more
exactly.
angular, the more elliptical they become.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are all. See, this is. I think. Let's see. I think this one was Arabia Swamp. I think that's what this was. This is one of those that I took from the air, and it was. By the way, it was raining.
Yeah.
So there was, on a couple of moments there, that I was thinking, look, this is valuable research, and I just.
Yeah.
This didn't turn out. This was my first aerial flight.
Okay.
I've done like many since then.
Right.
And most of them pretty cool. There was one flying, doing a traverse of the Snake River, where it was like 40-mile-an-hour gusts.
Right.
And I did think there was the possibility of death being the outcome.
Small plane travel. It can be very exciting.
It can.
A lot more exciting than the big jets sometimes. Holy crap. I've had a few of those moments myself.
Man, I'm pretty close to that shot. I'm telling you. Still haven't hit it yet, though.
It's good stuff.
It is. Yeah. I was going to think.
Raymond T. Cox-Rouse, he was the one who then wrote, 1977. So 1977 now is after Douglas Johnson's book of the same title. Well, let's see. His title was
Sane 22.
The Origin of the Carolina Bays. And this was the work by this guy who I think basically said, I better step into the thing here and come up with another theory to discredit this impact hypothesis before somebody else does. Because bear in mind, in the 50s, both William Prouty and Douglas Johnson passed away. And when they passed away, the controversy that had been raging for 25 years or whatever pretty much died with it. But see, he does mention here that I noticed
Insane boosts. Oh, the back
the
boost.
Carolina Bays has been something of a geological enigma since their existence in the coastal plain was first recognized in 1848. Now, this was not. They were discovered in 1948, but only seen from the ground. So
Yes.
it was not until 1930 that this aerial perspective was achieved.
Yep.
Theories that have been proposed for the origin of the bays are numerous and diverse. Now, I find this next statement rather puzzling. Surprisingly, however, most workers seem to have neglected the concept of uniformitarianism in their studies of these remarkable features. Hence, few investigations have been designed to compare or contrast the Carolina bays with modern analogs in Alaska, Chile, and Texas. Notice they've got modern analogs underlined. Well, would that not lead you to think that, oh, well, there are examples then of Carolina bays being formed. They've got modern analogs in Alaska, Chile, and Texas.
Seems to be what he's hinting at.
Yeah, well, so I did research into the modern analogs in Alaska, Chile, and Texas, and they were all at least as old as the Carolina bays. So this is a nonsensical statement. Now, here, notice this strategy. Investigations of oriental lakes and bays in these different geographic areas have shown that the processes that initially produced them apparently differ. However, absolutely no evidence has been encountered that would support an extraterrestrial origin. Incipient oriented lakes develop in topographic depressions created by coastal, fluvial, Aeolian, solutioning, glacial, periglacial, and perhaps some tectonic processes. So he's gone even way beyond Douglas Johnson, right? Now we got fluvial, Aeolian, solutioning, glacial. So, but you know that what is that? That's explaining absolutely nothing.
It's this word soup, I guess. Here's all the possible terms and processes that could have, in some combination, might have made this. It's not. It's not really an explanation.
It is not. But notice what I've got under develop in topographic depressions. Well, notice that he sort of conveniently sidesteps the most important part of the whole process. So he already assumes the topographic depressions are there. Well, how the hell did they get there, Raymond? So,
yes. Yeah, something's got to create the depression in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. He says, few known impact craters on Earth or other planets could be classified as elliptic, due to the fact that meteorites are generally believed to explode on impact, producing a spherical rather than an elliptical crater. If one therefore assumes that these craters are not spherical because the meteorites did not explode on impact, the logical conclusion would be that at least some meteorites would remain. However, no meteorite material has ever been discovered in association with any of the bays. So I've got that underlined for the simple reason that I would suggest that that's not a true statement. And then this is how he goes on, and you can see his orientation of his thinking. In retrospect, it is rather unfortunate that the meteorite theory ever made its way into the literature, since many laymen and even a number of geologists still subscribe to it in spite of the fact that no concrete supportive evidence whatsoever exists.
This guy could have been an archaeologist.
Now, interestingly, notice how dismissive he is, and yet he has absolutely no explanation for it to offer as a counterpart.
Yes, I do.
So,
yeah, that's kind of why I said he could have been an archaeologist, because that's kind of how how they roll in a lot of ways too. We have these processes, therefore it must have been these processes. I can't explain it using these processes, but there's no evidence for your process, so it must be my process. It's kind of like what? No.
So here it is safe to assume that daily processes rather than catastrophic will affect creating difficulties. So it's just daily processes. And then he cites 3 examples of Alaska, Texas, and
Chile.
And the third one calls them modern analogs, but they aren't modern analogs. They're there, they're fully formed, they're old, they're just other analogs, they're not modern. And then he performs one experiment that supposedly clinches his argument. So he sets up a stream table with sand and he blows some fans across it.
Such a
This is
scam.
what he
That was
gets.
such a scam.
Vertical view of Cox-Rowski's model experiment using unconsolidated sand in conjunction with high-speed fans. Now, so now you arrange the fans in exactly the right way to blow the sand to try to get the closest approximation possible of a bay. And what you end up with, of course, looks more like a football than a bay.
Yeah. That's not an elliptical.
No. So
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So I think there's fairly conclusive. Certainly a lot of evidence that suggests that there was some sort of extraterrestrial, impact-related event in process in making these, and that's kind of something that I'd like to pivot to, which is given that there seems to, and it's if this was a meteor storm or a shower of impacts, or even if it was an impact into the ice in Saginaw Bay,
Let's go back to the one-shot second cam. I really should.
Entire process, and humans living through this at the time. It's in a lot of ways like it's. I think it explains
what's up?
our fascination with the sky in ancient cultures. I think it explains a lot of the mythology that comes
Thanks,
down
man.
to us. Like it's just the idea
Back
of
at you, my
danger
man.
and snakes in the sky, all that the cosmic fire. I mean, you've been researching this topic for forever, but it's something that I like to think about is kind of the impact that it would have had on people that lived through it and somehow survived it, and how this would be remembered, and kind of how it's been transmitted culturally down to us today. Like I think almost every culture has, and every religion kind of has some evidence of this in them, and it's symbolic. It's like you say the top of the temple at Dendera. I think it comes at you from just a ton of different angles.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does. It absolutely does, and yeah, okay. It turns out that the next quote I've got
Yep.
is from 1997 from a gentleman named George A. Howard.
Okay. Yeah, actually, we
So,
should see that one for sure.
Let's see, George is, now this was, he's talking about Robert Cobras, an independent researcher in Athens, Georgia. When we were doing Fire from the Sky in 1996, I went and interviewed because I wanted him to be a major part of that show, and then they didn't use any of his material, which was too bad.
There is no God.
The stuff
Like, there
I
is no
had
God.
to go in 1996 would have been at least a decade ahead of its time, and most of that just got edited out
Okay.
for the 50 minutes or whatever that got shown on with TBS and CNN that showed it.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's one of the reasons why people like podcasting and they like this sort of thing, because it's you get to have the long form conversation, and in particular like the stuff you're doing. On
Whatever, we can do it again.
It's great because you get to just drill down into topics and take the time that's required to really explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's George's quote?
Well, he says, Robert Cobras, an independent researcher in Athens, Georgia, has studied Carolina bays for nearly 20 years in conjunction with his larger interest in impact threats from space. His recent self-published investigations have profound consequences for Carolina Bay study and demand research by academia as serious, relevant, and previously unexamined new information. The essence of Cobras' theory is that the search for debris and the comparison of bays with traditional impact craters falsely and naively assumes that circular craters with extraterrestrial material in them are the only terrestrial evidence of past encounters with objects entering Earth's atmosphere. To explain the bays, Cobras proposes a similar encounter, albeit of larger proportions and more accurately described as a near miss. The Cobras event proposes that a comet, if you like, whipped past the Earth, exchanging enormous energy, but not impacting directly to form a typical crater. It is demonstrable that such an encounter would show an intense flash of heat onto the ground below. So there's another theory.
Yeah.
So Cobras goes a logical step further by assuming that forces associated with incoming bodies, principally intense heat, should also leave visible signatures on the Earth. And finally, that physics does not demand that a collision of the bodies need necessarily occur to produce enormous change on the Earth. To verify that such encounters are possible outside of the physics lab, we need look no further than the so-called Tunguska event. June 30th, 1908, in the vicinity of the Tunguska River, deep in Siberia, a tremendous explosion instantly leveled 2,000 square kilometers of tundra, felling trees by the millions. It was actually been estimated over 80 million trees.
Like matchsticks.
All left pointing outward from a central area. At the epicenter of the explosion lay not a large crater with a rock in it, as might be expected, but nothing more than a number of neat oval balls. Now, what I want you to do is look at, I'm going to do a share screen, so that we can see some of these neat oval logs.
Yeah. Huh. I see the.
You can
Yeah,
see
these.
them out here. There's,
Right.
there's dozens of them. And some more. Yeah,
That's
here's
ground
one right
zero.
here.
That's the center. Okay.
Yeah, one of the many oval crater swamps Kulik found near the epicenter. Note the forest devastation on the hill in the background. The trees splayed over. Yeah, here again, notice.
Now, is
there's a
that
lot of-
is that related to the topographical feat, like the sediment, or is it all a consistent
Well, it's all
ground layer?
tundra, it's soil. A lot of it's frozen soil. But here you go. Look at this. That really looks like a Carolina. One
Yeah.
of the small, neat oval bogs that Kulik erroneously presumed to be secondary craters of the fragmented meteorite.
Interesting.
This one was named after the ethnographer Susan. But the point is, you did not have a ground impact, you had an aerial burst
And they produce
with
the shapes.
shock waves with presumably conical fronts intersecting the surface of the Earth and creating formations that now, yeah, and here you can see there's numerous of these shallow, swampy, elliptical shapes under the epicenter of the Tunguska explosion.
And that appear to be overlapping as well.
Yeah. So, what's the story? I don't know. But to me,
Yeah.
when I looked at this, my conclusion was that, gosh, this is strong evidence. Tunguska seems to provide a model.
Right.
So imagine you've got a few 100,000
Yeah.
Tunguska type object. So this is the idea that I kind of latched onto.
Yeah.
I'm not emotionally attached to the idea, but I'm certainly willing to consider the ice boulder hypothesis.
But
At
this,
this
yeah.
point, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll be honest and throw up my hands and say, I don't know.
Well, I haven't heard this comparison and then been walked through that you're thinking on the base either to this extent. I'm in the same camp, honestly. Like it's what seems to be pretty clear to me is one way or the other it's cosmically induced. It doesn't. I'm not. I really don't. I have looked at the idea, like just the formation of the sandy rims on the south side. It's one of those things that is I don't think you can explain very well with terrestrial processes. And so whether
Right.
a bit, and it's gonna it's tough. It's gonna be tough to nail down specifically what it was. But yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, that's.
Hendrix going live in 90 minutes. Wow, insane.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play for maybe another 20
Yeah.
minutes. I'm gonna probably
Well, and
do
it's
either a
evidence of just
weightlifting
some
stream
traumatic,
or I might go outside and
So
skateboard or something.
some cosmic
What it
debris.
seems like. It's what it
Yeah.
seems.
What he has to show us, insane.
That's epic.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, so that's kind of where my thinking is at. I mean, it goes further than that,
You think he's hoarding?
but that's a good start.
Yep. It
And
is.
you know, Tunguska
Another
is
train sweep, yeah,
interesting
right?
because,
Can you imagine?
You know, June 30th, 7:30 in the morning, peak of the torrid meteor.
Dude, I might start playing
Yes.
Train with this Japanese
timing is-
cartridge.
Yeah, the timing, but not only that, the radiant point. Let's see, I might show you another. Yeah, here we go.
I'm not a big Train. I mean, I do like Train, but I mean, it's a grind.
Here we go. Radiant points of various.
Well,
cosmic
Ace got,
entities.
what,
So if
57
you're standing here and
Agent
standing
on...
to the south,
I know I'm not
the
Ace, but
sun over here.
Right.
Ace got
It'll be
57
at
on
the time
Japanese.
of the Tunguska event. Points
Which is insane.
A, K, and Z. If you look carefully, A,
Yep.
there's K and Z represent successive approximations.
The
of
Japanese
radiance.
has PAL-like features.
So as scientists gathered data, they were able to refine and get ever more accurate determinations.
So it's good for jungle.
Where exactly in the sky did this object emanate from? Right. So here we're gonna
Yeah, I'm gonna play another
identify
20 minutes. Watch lasers, yeah. It's good, but PAL is better, I
You've
think.
got a number of Earth-approaching comets. Here's Comet Halley, the radiant point. Here's some hollow asteroids. Oh, there's the Eretid radiant, Perseids, and now look here, the Beta Taurids, the Sun. So, and Z is the most accurate determination of the point of emanation. Notice how close it is to the Beta Taurids.
Yeah.
It's coming right from that part of the sky that you would expect to see a torrid meteor. And it's coming exactly at the time of the year
When we
when
pass it
that's
through.
where they would be coming from, right next to the sun, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why people didn't see it till late.
That was insane.
Yeah.
That was so close.
Yeah. So low.
So for those two reasons, the timing,
It's like 21
and the
pace.
placement of it is strong evidence that it was probably part of the torrid stream.
A quick intermission from the podcast. I wanted to take a minute to introduce a new segment that I'm going to be putting in the middle of my longer podcasts like this one and at the end of my more produced videos. And don't worry, we'll get back to the conversation with Randall pretty soon here where we've got a lot more to talk about in the show. But I wanted to find a way to thank people that have gone kind of above and beyond in supporting my work and Uncharted X and the things that I'm trying to do on this channel. So what I've decided to do is add producer credits to the show for people that are supporting my work at sort of higher monetary levels. These are real credits. They're real producer credits, just like the ones in Hollywood. You can use them on your LinkedIn. You can add them to anywhere that you want to use them. I will happily verify and vouch for any of these credits. You'll be thanked in the show description itself. You'll be thanked on my website and credited as such, as well as on the audio versions of these podcasts. I'm going to try and keep this simple, and there's only going to be two types of credits in these brief donation segments. Associate executive producer credits will be for donations of $100 or more, and then executive producers will be for people that donate in $200 or more, and there are a few of those, and I wanted to take the time to thank these people individually. So if you do support me via PayPal, you want to send a note in or anything, I will read that note out and thank you individually for it. I wanted to find a way to do that for the people that have done so. So for this first segment, I'm going to go back to the start of 2021. There are a couple of people here that I wanted to thank specifically. So starting with the executive producers in amounts of $200 or more, Bob Griffin. Huge thank you to Bob Griffin. He came in with $250 recently. He didn't send in a note in the PayPal. Bob, if you want to, please feel free to send me a note and I'll read that out on a future show. But thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Also, Anthony Steele from RebellionGaia.com came in with $218 recently. Now, Anthony, interesting guy. He's working on an indie game. It's called Rebellion Gaia. There's actually a link down in the description below for a preview of that. I think the game is coming out on Steam in May, in the next few weeks. I actually worked with Anthony. I did a few voice lines for a character in the game. It was kind of an interesting experience, my first experience doing that sort of thing. So if you're into indie games and that type of thing, check out the preview for the game. I think a free demo is coming out in the next few weeks. Also, I really wanted to thank John and Marcia over at MLE Engineering. They came in recently with a $200 support. Huge thank you to you guys. MLE Engineering, John, they've supported me in the past a couple of times actually, so I'm incredibly grateful for the support they've shown me over the last couple of years really. So thanks John and thanks Marcia, I very much appreciate it. And now down to the associate executive level for producers that have supported me at $100 or more. I'm starting with Valerie Salazar, who came in with $104.60, and she sent in a note with the donation that reads, "Greetings from Switzerland. I'm a career scientist and huge fan of the way you present simple yet powerful observations about the evidence that has been right in front of us, but has been largely ignored or even dismissed. Keep up the great work. Cheers, Valerie." Thanks, Valerie. Very much appreciate that. I'm glad that you're enjoying the work so far. Also, Mark Hopkins from Mark Hopkins Murals and Faux Finishes Incorporated came in with $100. He wrote a note that said, "Hello Ben, big fan because your work is thorough, well-reasoned and intelligent. $100 ain't enough to cover the value I've received from your vids, etc., but it's a start. I would be interested in joining a tour of yours. Where do you post your tours and itineraries? Cheers, Mark Hopkins." And the website for Mark is hopkinesque.com. Mark, thanks very much, first of all, for that. And you can find all the details about my tours on my website, it's unchartedx.com. I have 2 trips planned this year. One is actually in August with Brian Forrester. We're going back to Peru and Bolivia. I think all of the details for that one are over on Brian's website. I'm kind of tagging along with him on this one. It's hiddenincatours.com. I'm pretty sure it's sold out. And then I've announced an Egypt trip for October 2021. And in fact, I just heard today that that's pretty much filled up, although there will be a wait list. And if you're interested in getting on that trip, it's worth joining the wait list because people do fall off and have to pull out for various reasons. So if you're able to be flexible and get on that wait list, then it's certainly possible to do. And all of the details for that trip are on my website, unchartedx.com/tour. And thanks again, Mark. Ryan Calderon has come in with $100. Now, Ryan, his website is www.pocketrider.biz. I've got to thank Ryan because he kind of prompted me to create this segment. He literally wrote to me and said how much and how can I get a producer credit for some of your work, and it was something that I'd been thinking about for quite some time, trying to find a way to thank people. And I hope this sort of fills that request, Ryan. It's something that it's a good idea. It's something I want to keep doing going forward. And he writes that this is an associate executive producer credit for your next podcast or show, and looking forward to it. Thanks, Ryan. So again, thanks, Ryan. Very much appreciated. Just a couple more here. Andrew Roman came in with $100, and he wrote a note. He wrote, "Thank you for your work, Ben. I really enjoy the way you approach the topics and the guests that you bring into the discussions. I spent a few days in Cairo for work around 2001 and was able to visit Giza and the Egyptian Museum. I came away from that trip with a lot of similar questions to those you pose on your channel. Hopefully I'll make it back to Egypt and some of the other megalithic sites one of these days after the virus." Great work. Best regards, Drew. Thanks, Drew. Cheers. I very much appreciate it. I hope you get back to Egypt sometime soon as well. It's very much worth going, and it's not going anywhere. But sooner is better with Egypt. I think with the reduced tourist numbers, it's still a very good opportunity to visit the place. And so lastly, we're going to finish up with Toby Young, who came in with $100 as well. Toby wrote in, "Hi Ben, my name is Toby, 62 years old, degree in physics and 40 years experience in telecoms, UK based. I really appreciate your work and methodical approach to this difficult subject. I respect people like you who will carry the flag forward as some of the pioneers begin to fade away. I was with Brian Forrester in Egypt last year and I'm in Peru with him this November, hopefully. One question I keep struggling with is not if an ancient high-tech civilization existed in prehistory, but how did they develop their technology? We progressed through steam, coal, oil, electric, nuclear and solar power to achieve our level of tech. When we dug for coal, it was there. Drill for oil, it was there. Mine uranium, it is still in the ground. So what path did our ancient high-tech ancestors take to develop their tech? Why is there no space junk in orbit from pre-1957? If I can help you research anything, I'm happy to offer resource. I'm retired and need a project. Thanks, Toby." Well, thank you very much for the support, Toby. I very much appreciate it. It's a very good point. In fact, I have a couple of my earlier podcasts where I talk about technology and kind of our approach to technology.
That's got to be the
kind of
strap.
classified
It's got to be.
Electromechanical approach to problem solving, and our technology has definitely developed along certain lines. And I've talked about it in a few different podcasts, but I think that it's certainly possible for technology to have developed along other lines, and that may be what we're looking at with some of these examples in the past. Sort of a more organic technology. The example being, say, as we go into space, we make spacecraft made out of lightweight composite materials because we need them to be lightweight, but assuming over time, if you can conquer forces like gravity, the fundamental forces of nature itself, eventually your spacecrafts might start looking like, small planets or small moons that contain an atmosphere that can generate their own gravity, things like that. So, it's always important, I think, when we look at this stuff from the past to try and keep the blinkers off and understand that some of the answers to this may be technology that exists out of our current understanding that may have progressed along a whole different path. But it's a great comment, and thank you again for the support. I do want to also say that, so anyone that does support me in amounts of $50 or more, if you leave a mailing address or a posting address, I'll send you one of these. It's a die-cut sticker. I do this fairly frequently for also those of you that
support me
through the value for value model, signing up through Patreon, Subscribestar, the channel memberships. I also do mail outs. I've just done one for all of those platforms. I do those fairly frequently, a couple times a year. I'll send out merch to everybody that supported me there. So I greatly appreciate support. The value for value model is the only way that I can kind of spend the time to make and edit all of these videos, and I'm very much appreciative.
Wow,
for
insane!
It might just be subscribing and liking.
I didn't hit them though. It's not a completion. This is a fail,
and you can find all
but
the ways to do that. It's all
probably
out
gonna be
on
a
my
23
website.
fail.
It's unchartedx.com/support. Now back to the podcast and enjoy the rest of
Might
my
be
conversation
22.
with Randall Carlson. So one of the most interesting parts of all of this to me is how comets and the cosmic environment. We have all this evidence today of cataclysm, of just upheaval times that happened through the Younger Dryas, potentially even earlier than that. We know that from the age of our own species that's gotten older and older, that humanity has lived through this. Like we had our ancestors, definitely it dinged our population, but we lived through it, and this would have been a super traumatic event. And it's just an area that's of interest to me is how this is recorded and remembered and commemorated in a lot of ways in traditions, in religions, in cultures. And I think we see the echoes of that down through time, down to today's times even. Although we in some cases just dismiss it as myth and legend and nonsense, in the same way that you talked about with the shift away of geology from catastrophism, the biblical sense, towards this more scientific approach. But in some cases it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because given the proliferation of modern scientific evidence that supports this, we can kind of look back at some of those tales and make a bit more sense of them, I think. Now, do you have any particular examples of this that you think...
Alright, 10 more minutes and then I'm going to sign off.
That,
Maybe sooner. I might take a little break now and then I might play a little more. I gotta see.
People who were thinking about such things were profoundly catastrophists.
I'm gonna take a break now.
And then we see that the founding fathers of modern geology, from Georges Cuvier, William Buckland, Adam Satt...
What are you working out today?
Murchison,
I don't know. I might go skateboarding. Instead of lifting weights, probably go
they were
skateboarding. I
all
don't know yet.
catastrophists.
I'm gonna take a walk
Right?
and
Yeah,
see.
they all were. And then you had the rise and dominance of gradualist dogma, uniformitarianism between the mid and late 19th century, and by the end of the 19th century,
That's true,
it had
anyway.
come to be pretty much the dominant paradigm. And so now we're kind of, I think of it as the new catastrophism. We are going back and we can actually reread and relook at some of the observations and reflections and thoughts by some of these early geologists who were looking at landscapes and seeing them as the end product of catastrophic events. And we can also now look back at the archaic world and their traditions that have come down to us in the form of myth and legend, and now begin to recognize the catastrophism, the actual plausible catastrophism that's contained there. And so we are now in this really interesting phase of this emergence of this new catastrophism. So we've got ancient catastrophism, then we have catastrophism from the founding days of geology, in the 19th century. Then we had a century of dominance of uniformity and gradualism. Then starting in 1980, in the 80s, in the 90s, we've had this accelerating body of evidence that is forming the framework for a new catastrophism. I will mention that as we're learning more and more and more about the history of catastrophic climate change on Earth, and that we see that catastrophism has been an integral part of global change processes on any time scale that we can measure. At the same time, there are now mountains of data and evidence of observations, empirical data as well as theoretical data, that support the idea of a very dynamic history of this planet. At the same time that is happening, the discussion in the mainstream media and in the political circles and so on has degenerated into the exclusion of all that.
Yes.
And the focus only on the anthropogenic element of climate change, of global change.
Right.
Which is too bad, because now what's happening is so much of what we're talking about, the average person that is totally, you talk to anybody, everybody's heard of global warming and climate change. Well, what does that mean, climate change, right? Well, we've been indoctrinated to think now of climate change as being this exclusive thing that is only happens because humans are burning fossil fuel, right? So what has happened now is we're neglecting this whole dimension, and this is why it's so important that you and I are having this conversation, and that we have this conversation, and because of the fact that it's being neglected. It's not being put out there in the mainstream media. Every month there's new scientific evidence proving over and over and over again the dynamic and catastrophic nature of global change, and it's not getting the mainstream press.
Yeah, it's right. You're exactly right. There's not. It's what I would. I mean, it's not a facetious way of putting it, but I think it's. Anybody that wants to talk about climate change has to look at the historical record of the, and as you say, the dynamic history of actual, and like I said, I'm not being facetious when I say this, but actual climate change is what happened in the late Pleistocene and in that period before it. And I mean, we don't, that's how you put this into context. Like those are the threats that we should worry about. And it's George Howard, I love the way he phrased this, which is like we're sitting in a car that's sitting on a railway track, and we're arguing about what channel the radio is on, and the train's coming. Like that's that's the analogy. Yeah, we don't. You can argue all day about whether or not there's actually an impact from anthropogenic sources or not, but it pales in comparison to the type of thing that the planet has gone through as a result of the cosmic environment, or even extreme volcanism, or these other sources, right? And the sun can be part of that. There's, as you say, all this science coming out that shows that there's this so much more to it than what's happened in the past, but it just doesn't hit the mainstream narrative.
Yes, and yes again. Yeah. And we keep hearing now about the climate crisis that we're in the midst of, right? We have a hurricane, a strong hurricane, a couple of them happen a year, like we pretend that this has never happened before.
Right.
The actual evidence shows it's happened over and over and over again. There's nothing unprecedented. So when we talk about climate crisis, I want to show this graph, if I may.
Yes, please.
That I think really exemplifies climate crisis, what we might really mean about climate crisis. So I am going to do a share screen, and we'll do this graph right here. Let me enlarge it.
Yes,
Here we go. Oxygen isotopes in green. So let me quickly, I love to present this graph, and I've presented it many times. I presented it on Rogan's show.
Yeah.
But we'll look at it here for the sake of consistency. Relative oxygen isotope ratios. I won't go into that. We've only got a minute. But as you go into the larger negative numbers, you're getting that's the implication of colder weather.
Yes.
It's a ratio of oxygen 18 to oxygen 16, heavy oxygen to light oxygen, because during warmer times you have much more energetic evaporation from the oceans. It transports more heavy oxygen. In colder times you have a suppression of the heavier oxygen, and so you have this diminishing ratio. So this graph here is the Holocene.
Yes.
0 is present, 10 is 10,000 years ago.
Yep.
And what you see when you look at this graph, the magnitude of these changes varies between about 2 and 4 degrees. So look, like, see this little spike right here?
Yeah.
That's about 2.5 to 3 degree spike in temperature, right? So what you see from this graph is constantly oscillating climate. 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for 10,000 years. Get back right here. This is an interesting little excursion right here. This was the 8,200 to 8,300 year cold snap. Now it looks pretty insignificant within this graph. If this was to happen right now, that graph, that cold right there, could spell the end of modern civilization.
Yeah. Famine.
Why?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about a century here where the average global temperature has dropped by 4 or 5 degrees.
Yeah. That's
Okay,
huge.
what's that going to imply in terms of agriculture? What's that going to imply in terms of crops? What the implication of this right here is you've got decades of period where you're going to have multiple agricultural collapse events.
Yeah.
And that's going to lead to famine. Famine is going to lead to pestilence because
Disease.
people's immune systems get weak. Now you have opportunistic diseases. Okay, so this could qualify as a climate crisis right here.
Yeah.
Right. Now look what happens as we get down here. We see that the graph is trailing off to the left at about 10,000 years ago. This is 1,500 meters down. Cold.
Yes. In the
Right, so
ice
we're
core.
getting way down there in the ice. So what I want to do is I'm going to take this graph. We've shown here, this we won't have time to get into this now, but this is showing alternating warm and cold spells. It's showing how culture and civilization advanced during the warm periods and regressed during the cold periods.
Yeah. People don't know, like things like the Renaissance warm period.
Right. Now I'm going to bump this graph down into the late ice age so you can see what a real climate crisis looks like.
Yeah. That's a fantastic graph.
It is. Look at that. That's right. Now, what does this mean? I mean, how long do you think our modern civilization would survive through this?
Yeah, not very long.
No. Now, what they're trying to get us to believe is that somehow by adding 1 molecule of carbon dioxide per 10,000 molecules of air is going to cause a climate catastrophe,
Yeah.
right? When all it really is doing noticeably is driving a greening of the earth.
That's
We've
it.
got forests proliferating. We have, the sub-Saharan Africa beginning to green. The bulk, the bulk biotic material on the planet has increased about 20% when it was supposed to be going the other way.
Right.
But
Yeah.
aside from all that, which is a whole discussion we could and should have,
We should.
we've got this to contend with. And we don't have an explanation for this. But we darn sure ought to come up with some kind of an understanding of what's going on here, because this is a natural dynamic here.
It is.
Now,
Yeah.
Yeah. What's driving this?
That's
If
the
we
big
don't
question.
know, and we don't know, don't tell me that the science is settled. Don't tell me that the debate is over. No,
Yeah.
I will say to you that the debate is barely getting started. So don't try to shut down this discussion. because we need to have this discussion. It's
Yes.
important.
Yeah, it puts all of this into context. It really does. And it's unfortunate that the science and the study of this gets so politicized and driven by
Yeah.
agendas and money ultimately, right? It's all about there's the whole carbon credit, setup of exchange. It becomes this political, money-driven argument about control, and unfortunately, that seems to be the case for so much of modern, mainstream media. And the whole CO2 thing, I think, I do live in hope that that whole CO2 forcing thing will go out the window. I think it's starting to in some of the leading institutions in science. I think that IPCC 2022 report, when they start to allow the influence of the sun on these effects, it's going to really diminish the importance of the CO2 model. But at this point, there's so much political and mainstream weight behind it that they're going to continue with it. I mean, not for nothing, but back when the planet supported the largest life forms it ever has in the Jurassic period, I mean, the CO2 levels were far higher, and when the planet was far warmer, and everything was fine. Life was blooming on this planet everywhere, like megafauna, megaflora. It's not warming and CO2. Exactly, yeah. Warming and CO2 it's not the devil. Like, it's not, and slight, it's cold is the issue for civilization. And
Cold, and that was in that graph that I showed. I mean, yes, cold has been detrimental to civilization.
Yes, definitely.
Warm means
good.
you've got a longer growing season.
Yeah.
You've got copious rainfall. You're growing a lot more food, and this is why we can see the transition from the so-called Dark Ages, which was a cold period, into the medieval warm period, when the Vikings were colonizing and farming western Greenland, and in Europe you had the birth of this tremendous, the Gothic flowering, where all of the great cathedrals were built during the warmest 2 centuries of the last 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. The reason is that there was abundant food, and compared to people in 2 or 3 centuries earlier, during the cold of the Dark Ages, right? What happened? You had increased lifespans. You had actual increased stature of people. You had reduction in infant mortality, right? The agricultural surpluses caused an increase in population that would enable the amassing of the labor force to build these tremendous, works of divine art. And then you can actually see the progression of the Gothic movement. All of a sudden, within about a decade, it all pretty much comes to an end between around 1320. What happened? 1320, 1314 to 1340 was the onset of the first phase of the Little Ice Age. A series of agricultural collapses brought on weakened immune systems, opportunistic diseases, and guess what happened after 2 decades of global cooling? The bubonic plague.
Yes.
Yeah. And third, the population of Europe were piled up as corpses within a year or two. And that, my friends, is a real pandemic.
This is true. Yes, this is very true. There's a historical context to all of this, and I think that's the study of what's happened before is super important, and it's the thing that gets forgotten the most. I feel like in a lot of the modern narrative and the mainstream media.
This is why I am so opposed to the canceling of history.
Yes.
Because look, we learn as much from the warts in the historical narrative as we do everything else. And okay, if so right here in Decatur where I live, the whole time I've been here for 30 years, right in downtown on the square, there's a statue of a seated Thomas Jefferson writing in his notebooks. Right? That got taken away within the last year.
Really?
Right? Yeah. Now, I'm sorry, but that pisses me off.
Yeah, it pisses me
Now,
off.
was Jefferson perfect? Well, no, but he was a man ahead of his time, but he was also a man of his time.
Yes.
He comes there on the tail end of thousands of years of slavery being an accepted part of most cultures, all cultures almost, right?
Well, every culture's enslaved. You go back far enough, every group of people has enslaved everyone else.
And yes again. Right. Native Americans enslaved each other. Native Americans
I do not
enslaved
agree with what is
blacks.
being said.
There were blacks that enslaved
no.
Native Americans.
Oh no, where's this going?
Probably pirate trade, right? There's,
Yes, slavery is a horrible thing.
still
But what
happens.
you had was a generation of people in the late 1700s into the early 1800s that were laying the groundwork. Nobody's going to be able to come along with a magic wand and say, slavery be gone, and it's instantly gone. It took multiple generations to get from the idea of the worth of the individual, right?
Yeah.
To the idea that from the worth of the individual follows the idea that nobody has the right to own somebody else, right? And that's an idea that's not going to just materialize because some, virtue signaler decides, hey, this is a bad thing. No, it took generations. And, originally Jefferson wanted to have an anti-slavery clause in the Declaration. Well, that got shot down because of the fact that there was a bigger fish that had to be fried, which at that point was independence from Great Britain. And in order to get that independence, you had to have the full support of all the colonies. So it was a trade-off. Was it the right trade-off? I don't know. We can argue that. But if you suppress that history, well, now that argument can never be made. And we won't know the process, how we got from there to here.
Yeah, he was part of the generation that ended this process. I mean, there's
Yes.
and
yes.
it's not, this is one aspect of a far more symptomatic issue, which is the modern trend of applying, and no doubt, like thinking and a lot of these concepts have gone forward in the intervening hundreds of years since those times, but you simply can't take those modern values and modern times and apply them to your grandfathers, to the times of Jefferson, because the fact is that as progressive as you may be today, had you been born back in those times, in those circumstances, in a human body that lived in those times, you would have gone in exactly the same direction as everybody else. You would have, these are products of societies and time and civilization, and you just, as you say, we learn as much from the warts of these things. And this gets to the bigger problem that I have with the whole cancel culture, censorship in general. What universities in a lot of cases have turned into with this, the idea that we're all about diversity, but as long as you agree with me, then that's the only diversity we'll tolerate. I think it's a big problem because, you're supposed to be able to face challenging ideas and debate them honestly, because that's how you refine thinking. That's how we move ideas forward. You can't, there's that. You can't just shut down these ideas and change the pictures of history, because you'll end up repeating them simply by trying to enforce these mandates in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree. I think it's a big problem, and it's one that extends to so many fields. There's climate, there's society in general, but it's and the whole mainstream media machine sort of feeds it, and it's turned into this propaganda engine that it just.
Oh yeah.
I think there's more and more people are waking up to that and stepping away from sort of those mainstream sources. Yeah, I hope so.
We need to get away from them. There's no, we don't need to be afraid of ideas, even if those ideas turn out to be wrong. But that's we talk about democracy. Well, look, if we can't have debate, then there's no such thing as democracy. Is just a farce.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
It is. It's just a farce.
Yeah. The answer to speech that you don't like is more speech. It's like arguing. That's you hoist them on their own petards. Like it's not a. That's the answer. It's not to then to cancel it, to change it, to take down statues and do all this. It's this trend of historical revisionism that is going on is disturbing, and I have the same.
Very disturbing.
And I think any true student of history would probably find it fairly disturbing too.
Well, like you said, it's the politicization of this, and climate change is the perfect example of where if you raise some of the obvious questions and glaring contradictions in the prevailing narrative. The typical response is, well, you're a climate change denier.
Yeah.
Or I've been called multiple times, he's a climate change denialist.
Yes, that's right. You
Like,
get labeled.
Where have I ever?
Yeah.
And I certainly, and have said on Joe Rogan several times, look, carbon dioxide can induce climate change. It's one variable in a very complex equation. But I think in the final analysis, it will turn out to be one of the less important. And we can get into having a discussion about the whole issue of what happens with thermal capture in the 14 to 17 micron window with enhanced carbon dioxide. We can talk about the feedbacks that were put into the models in order to ramp up the effects. All of that. Yeah.
All about the computer models. Like, this is all generative. All of this science, it's all based on ultimately faulty computer models. If you want a summary of the whole thing, like I think that's where it is.
You are exactly right there. It's all based on computer models, which in retrospect appear to be largely faulty. Yeah. And this is why there has been such a divergence, what's called the divergence problem. Yeah. The divergence problem is the actual data, raw data, of temperature change compared to the projection of 20 years ago. That's right.
And then there's been an adjustment. Like, there's been there's so, we can get, it's a whole other topic of how, cool the past and warm the present. I mean, there's been adjustments from the raw data of actual thermometer readings to match trend lines based on these projections of computer models, and it just doesn't match reality. At this point, we're so far away from what actual science is that it's just, it's crazy. And as you say, the whole thing's politicized to the point where I always find it amusing to have to point out to somebody that the second you claim to say that, okay, well, this climate crisis doesn't exist. I mean, forget the fact that they've been using teenagers and 12-year-old girls to then say, oh, you're attacking a child if you disagree. But you always have to. This is how the thinking it's been ingrained in people, that you have to clarify that this doesn't mean that I am pro-pollution. It's like, as soon as if you don't think the climate crisis exists, then you must be for pollution. Like, this is absolute garbage. Two separate topics. Like, who would think that? I look after the earth. We need we shouldn't be polluting it. We shouldn't be all of this shit. Yeah, it drives me absolutely crazy.
Oh, how many times have I seen that and had that claim made against me? You're for pollution. Well, and then of course, going back to the Obama years and the Obama EPA redefining carbon dioxide as pollution.
Yeah.
Well, if that is, then what about oxygen? What about every substance necessary for life on Earth? Yeah. We can call anything pollutants then.
We can, CO2 is not a pollutant. That's funny. It's like I think it's all where they're working towards to put a tax on breathing. It's like
that's what it like. Yeah, because every exhale we do, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. We are carbon dioxide producing machines. We take in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. But look, plants take in carbon dioxide. Look, carbon dioxide. We got a carbon molecule, two oxygens. Photosynthesis uses the carbon molecule and one oxygen molecule, and then it releases that additional oxygen molecule into the atmosphere. So without photosynthesis, the atmosphere would soon be depleted of oxygen. Yeah. And, we're 400 parts per million. Big deal. Look, if you go figure, like you said, for most of history, 1,200 to 7,000 parts per million, right? And life seemed to proliferate. But on the other end of the scale,
we're much closer to the other end of the scale.
A couple of hundred parts per million, we're getting dangerously close to the point at which photosynthesis starts to shut down.
Yep, it's an issue. Well,
let's just look at one last thing, because we'll leave it there, because this is so I will go here, because this was the other topic which we won't have time for, but we will get to it anyway a little bit just to show that there's this other side of the evidence. Statue of Zeus hurling a thunderbolt. Statues in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, dates from circa 450 BC. So that's right around the time, not long after Solon returned to Athens from his sojourn in Egypt and brought back the story of Atlantis, which was destroyed by a thunderbolt. Yep.
Come from the sky.
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. And we can go in, we've got a lot of stuff here we can get into.
Yes.
Juicy stuff, ancient eyewitness accounts.
Comet drawings from China,
Yeah. Really good stuff. Just the traditions in general. Iron Age spear made out of meteorite iron, and with these types of carvings on it. Notice the swastika there. Then go back and look at some of the commentary forms from China. There it is. Look at that. See that? This would be a rapidly spinning comet nucleus throwing out jets, volatile gases.
Yeah. And you'd see that coming for a little while.
Yeah. And then we have things like this, these really interesting.
It's too slow.
We could have in the future somewhere.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Could run more. It's too slow
This
though.
is actually right out of the Masonic tradition.
Didn't get the
Father
photo
Time
either.
Plaiting the long hair of this weeping maiden who's holding the Grail cup in one
Wow,
hand,
look at
the form
that.
of a
Wow.
Cyprian, and a
Insane.
sprig of acacia in the other hand, weeping over this book which is placed on this broken column. Father Time holds a scythe, and right down here is the hourglass. It's all right here.
It is.
First of all, remember what the word cometa means, from where we get the word comet. What does it mean, man?
I don't know.
Cometa, long hair.
Okay.
Long hair. Because so many comets gave the appearance of having long hair streaming. See? Here we have the long hair. So, yeah, comets in ancient cultures. And I have tons of stuff on this.
Yes. Yeah, we should definitely dive into this let's do another one, and I think this would be a great topic to get into.
Yeah.
So I think this is fascinating.
Buddha. What he's holding.
The
Dorje,
hourglass.
the thunderbolt, the symbol of cosmic power. Same thing that Zeus is hurling, right?
Yep. Okay.
So, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. And it's interesting that, and this is the last little anecdote. Years ago, I was giving a lecture on how important, I was talking about impact events and how important they were and all of this. And I made several references to they were important to ancient cultures, and it's likely that there were periods of enhanced bombardment in ancient cultures. And one young critic stood up and said, well, if what you're saying is true, and there was all of these bombardments, and it was so important that it affected their religion and everything like that, where's all the evidence for that? I said, well, okay, you got a couple of days here, and well, let's see, the show that I just was pulling up here, which could easily be double what it is now, has 226 slides.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's the documentation. But see, here's the thing. You've got to understand the language in which these traditions were preserved.
That's right.
The language of symbolism, right? And the accounts and so forth. If you don't understand that, you're going to miss it. So that's a big part of, some of what this research is let's look at how the ancient world experienced this, how they envisioned it, how they talked about it, and how they expressed the record and so forth. So
That's fast.
that's the conversation that one needs to have.
Wow, 24.
Then
Insane.
once you've had that, you begin to understand the
That was
symbolical
faster.
language, you go, oh my God,
It's
it's everywhere. It suffuses the whole ancient world all over.
Yeah, that's
It's
you're
very
right.
almost, yeah. And of course, we know, without question, people all over the ancient world were obsessed with watching the sky. There may have been multiple reasons, but I think we could easily say that one of the most important, if not the most important, was the simple fact that disasters were frequently visited from the sky. And, you know, and this will be the last thing, I promise.
It's all good.
Think about how these ideas are embedded in the very language
Yes.
we use, right? Think of disaster. The root of that is aster. Die. Yeah. That's like saying, so disaster comes right there, right at the center of the word. It's the star, right? Disaster would actually imply two stars, right? Look at the word catastrophe. Same thing. The root of the word catastrophe, star. And then we look at the traditions about stars falling to earth.
Yeah.
And the stars fell onto the earth as fig leaves shaken from a tree, a fig tree, in a mighty wind. Well, so they use metaphor, but that's what
it's
it's
not
talking
literal.
about.
That's
Yeah.
when you talk about with symbolism. It's not literal. It becomes deified and personified and part of stories and traditions. And that's how we remember the data. It's just like we wouldn't remember it through generations if it was a purely literal tale. Like and there's knowledge in all of these things. You're right. I mean, I think back to the old saying of like the sky falling in. I mean, that was always an old saying that's come through many cultures of like that's. You know, the end of the world was, the sky's going to fall in. It's like that. That's where it comes from.
Absolutely.
And there's no end of it in architecture. I mean, the Mayans, it's on pyramids.
Right.
Cosmic serpents. I mean, it's all
Cosmic, yeah.
Yeah.
And boy, this is something we can dive into.
Definitely.
And to me, the most really exciting development though, is that there seems to be a network of independent researchers coming together right now as we speak that are all looking at different aspects, different dimensions, different perspectives of this overall phenomena. And over the next few years, I think we're going to see a real cross-pollination of some really exciting ideas. And these are ideas that really critically need to get out there and become part of the mainstream discussion.
Yeah.
And I see, maybe a dozen podcasters now that are instrumental in that. Hopefully we'll bring a lot of those guys in under the umbrella of How To.
Yeah.
And we'll really be able to begin that dialogue that needs to happen and come up with creative ways of getting this story out there, because it's an alternative narrative to this whole thing we're being spoon-fed by mainstream media.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's one that gives, I think, a lot of context, and it helps fill in a lot of gaps and helps people, almost live your life and find your place in a lot of ways too, as a human. The mainstream narrative is just this very short-term vision that's just driven by political goals. But yeah, other than that, this was wonderful, and hopefully, I have the same hope that I think there's a rising tide of a lot of these people coming together with these ideas, and I agree that all of this stuff has to come out to the mainstream. So, yeah, this has been great, Randall. Thank you so much for your time once again. And as you say, we've sort of scratched the surface on a couple of things here. I'd love to get back in and touch on a couple more of them in the future. It'd be great.
Well, yeah, and there's such a mass of material here, and we will be exploring a lot of this in depth on the Cosmographia podcast. Yeah. So I would highly encourage people to come over. And if you go back to the first episode and start listening, we're building a case methodically, like you said, episode by episode, trying to lay out the whole broad framework of this shifting paradigm with enough detail in it that one can really begin to see the animal that's emerging, the entity that's coming out of. Because a lot of researchers were putting down these dots, and that's been going on for a while. But now we're in a stage where we can start connecting those dots. And what we're going to discover remains to be seen. But whatever it's going to be damn exciting.
Indeed. Yes, I think it will. agree.
All right, man.
All right. Yeah, well, thanks for your time. We'll do it again.
My
Look
pleasure,
forward to seeing
man.
you again. Cheers, Randy.
Come on.
Welcome back to Uncharted X. My name is Ben, and this video is a continuation of my series looking at the evidence for lost ancient high technology. This one is an interesting tale, and one I've been meaning to tell for quite some time. I originally thought it was going to be a short video, as if I could ever manage to make one of those, but the further I researched, the deeper the rabbit hole went, and I hope you'll enjoy exploring its depths with me. In this episode, I want to explore a couple of the unique features of ancient Egyptian Old Kingdom pyramid sites. Features that are clearly indicative for the use of advanced technology in their creation, which today leave us some tantalising hints as to functionality and purpose, certainly well beyond the ceremonial or religious label attached by mainstream archaeology to everything that comes from this period. What I'm referring to here is the use of hard basalt stone to create pavements in the structures around specific Old Kingdom pyramid sites. There are several well-known examples of these polished and remarkably flat floors, and wherever they're found, you don't have to look very far for the evidence of machining and advanced forms of stone cutting. Around and on such basalt floors are cutting marks and tool signatures that are quite distinctive, and very different to those made by the primitive and simple hand tools that we know the dynastic Egyptians utilised. In fact, these machining and tool marks seem to indicate the use of very large and even powered machines. They've been a fascination of mine for many years now, and have been investigated and analysed by the likes of Sir Flinders Petrie, Christopher Dunn, and several more mainstream contemporary Egyptologists. And to this day, their manufacture and purpose remains both a debate and a mystery. In addition to these basalt floors, Old Kingdom sites have another unique feature: the installation of channeled blocks that run beneath the flooring level of the structures and causeways that surround the pyramids. Indeed, there is evidence for what seems to have been an entire infrastructure of these channels in a subfloor level, which is a very strange feature, if you believe them to have been purely ceremonial temples. Given that they're hidden from sight, below several feet of stone pavement, what ceremonial purpose could these channeled blocks possibly serve? Their existence screams functionality, and when pressed, mainstream Egyptology has described them as a sewer system. But does this look like an appropriate outlet for a sewer? Why would you make a sewer system from incredibly hard stone like quartzite, or from the much sought after white alabaster, or even granite like this channel block at Gyges? All of these are stone types that have to be transported tremendous distances from their quarries to where we find them today. Safe to say that I have a different perspective on these features of Old Kingdom sites, and I hope you'll join me as we investigate these rarely discussed mysteries of some of the most ancient structures found anywhere on planet Earth. We begin with the basalt floors, the most famous example being, of course, the large basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid at Giza, most often used as a convenient resting spot for tourists, vendors, and camels. While most people just sit on this pavement, staring up at the pyramid, a close inspection of the blocks that form it will reveal a large number of plunge cuts, saw cuts, machining marks, and other evidence for advanced stone cutting, that cannot be explained by the tools and techniques attributed to the ancient Egyptians. Before we take a closer look at this aspect of the pavement, let's first understand what the material is that we're talking about. Around 90% of the volcanic stone on Earth is basalt, an igneous rock, meaning it was formed with great heat, that may also be plutonic, meaning some types of basalt may have cooled and then hardened underground. As with many other stone types, granite being an example, its common name can cover several different varieties, and basalt is no different. Without delving into the specific geochemistry, the stone that we see at Giza and the other Old Kingdom locations could also be said to be forms of diabase, dolerite, and most basalt is very similar to andesite in composition, distinguished only by its specific percentage of silica. The average density of basalt is actually greater than that of granite, making it a heavier stone to work, and as it's even harder than granite, it's just as challenging, if not more so, to cut and shape. In fact, the very name basalt is a derivative of the Latin basanites, meaning very hard stone. Its specific hardness can vary, but basalt is commonly a 7 or even an 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness. As mentioned, it's harder than granite, and it will easily scratch glass or even steel. Let's just assume that this is a very difficult choice of stone to do stonework in, particularly if you're some poor loincloth wearing punter with a flint chisel and a copper bar working out in the Egyptian sunshine. It's not only beside the Great Pyramid that we can find evidence of basalt in ancient structures. We also find such basalt floors at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Sir, at the Sahureh, Neferkare and Nusrat complexes. They are also found at nearby Saqqara, with a large basalt pavement and causeway discovered in the Yusakaf complex. And interestingly, basalt paving blocks were also discovered in the Great Pit below the Step Pyramid of Djoser, a structure that I've explored in some detail in a recent video. The link to that is below. As mentioned, the only significant use of basalt left at Giza today is the pavement that's next to the Great Pyramid. But this is far from the only use of basalt at this site. There were historical reports of basalt being used in the upper or pyramid temple of the middle pyramids, said to have been that of Pharaoh Khafre, although this cannot be confirmed as there is really no trace of basalt left here in evidence.
It's so dumb, guys.
The Great Box, or the so-called sarcophagus of the third pyramid, attributed to Menkaure, was also made from a single piece of basalt and weighed in at around 3 tons. It was discovered by Howard Weiss when he dynamited his way into the third pyramid in 1837. Weiss removed the basalt box from the structure and sent it back to England on board a merchant ship called the Beatrice. The Beatrice, though, never arrived in England, as on around October 13th of 1838, she encountered a storm in the Mediterranean and sank, bearing her ancient treasure with her to the bottom of the ocean and has yet to be found. There was a considerable amount of other antiquities from Egypt on board, along with the priceless stone box, and the Beatrice is but one of the many ships loaded with the treasure of ancient Egypt to be lost at sea. At the very least, a number of massive granite obelisks are also currently lying at the bottom of the ocean, thanks to shipwrecks and the nature of man. What I find particularly remarkable about the ancients' use of basalt is that it was only something that seems to have been done in the earliest parts of the Old Kingdom, and this is something even acknowledged by mainstream Egyptology. From the perspective of said mainstream history, it's a mystery as to why the use of basalt is not something that we see in later periods, or anything beyond structures attributed to the 6th dynasty. Further, it's long been a puzzle for Egyptologists as to exactly why this difficult stone was used in Old Kingdom architecture, given its intractable nature. Of course, any such explanation for this simply must be framed within the ceremonial/religious temple perspective that Egyptologists classify all such architecture within. It's not like the theology, rituals, or culture of ancient dynastic Egypt drastically changed beyond this early period. So why do we only see these remarkable machined pavements in the oldest of pyramid complexes? In 1993, James K. Hoffmeyer authored a paper published in the Journal of the American Research Center in Egypt, looking at this specific element of ancient sites. It was titled, "The Use of Basalt in Floors in Old Kingdom Pyramid Temples." Quoting from Hoffmeyer's paper, quote, "Over the years there has been considerable scholarly discussion devoted to the function of the various structures of Old Kingdom pyramid complexes. The explanations offered for the purpose of the valley or lower temple and the funerary or upper temple have found little consensus. What I should like to do is examine one feature of the funerary complex which has been recognised by scholars but has not been taken into account when formulating theories on the function of the lower and upper temples. Basalt has been found as flooring in a number of upper temples, but suggestions to explain its presence are lacking. 3 basalt paving blocks were discovered by C.M. Firth and J.E. Quibble in the Great Pit of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, but this may not have been their original locus. At Giza, virtually all that remains of the funeral temple of Khufu is the floor, which is made of basalt. Firth's clearing of the pyramid complex of Yusukaf at Saqqara in 1928-29 revealed a basalt pavement in the open court of the upper temple, measuring 35 by 21 metres. Connected to this, on the south side of the sanctuary, were 2 chambers on either side of the 6-pillared niche that were paved with black basalt. On the east side of the pyramid, Firth uncovered a chamber that he called a small offering place, which likewise had a basalt floor. And finally,
Alright, 5 more minutes and I'm going to sign off. I'm going to sign on. I'm going to do a weightlifting stream, I think.
The upper temples of Sahure, Neferkare,
Thanks for being here.
and Abu Sir also have basalt pavements.
Thank you, Southern Yellow Jack, for the sub.
You
rule, dude.
That of Nusrat, however, is quite well preserved. Beyond the 6th dynasty, no further examples of basalt pavements in funerary establishments can be cited. According to Dieter Arnold, there are no traces of basalt pavements in the 12th dynasty pyramid complexes at Lish and Dashur, where he has investigated. In general, the use of basalt was limited after the Old Kingdom, concludes J.R. Harris in his study of the lexicography of Egyptian minerals. Thus, it appears that the use of basalt in funerary structures is restricted to the Old Kingdom, and in the Saqqara, Abu Sir and Giza necropolises. End quote. Hoffmeyer goes on to discuss the potential quarry locations as a source of this basalt, which most likely came from an area just north of the Fayum, a well-known depression to the west of the Nile and around 60 kilometres south of Giza. Still visible on satellite imagery today is this green leaf-shaped agricultural zone. I've discussed the Fayum in several videos, as it's home to many ancient sites, including Hawara and the famed Lost Labyrinth of ancient Egypt. An ancient basalt quarry was discovered here in 1987 at a place called Udan el Faras, and there are even remnants of an ancient road, partly paved in basalt, leading south towards Lake Moeris. Further quoting Hoffmeyer's paper, quote, "The distance between this new quarry and the necropolises of Giza, 58 kilometres, and Saqqara, 61 kilometres, is not that great when compared with the distance required for shipping granite from Aswan. However, it was a considerable undertaking to quarry the hard stone and transport it to Giza. Besides this consideration, the complexity of installing a basalt pavement, which involved sawing and pounding the blocks into shape, must also be considered. This factor forces one to ask, why go to the additional trouble and expense of bringing basalt for paving Khufu's upper temple floor, rather than using local material or even a bedrock?" End quote. Why indeed? And why is there evidence on this basalt of far more than simple sawing or pounding? Hoffmeyer does go on to speculate for a ceremonial religious purpose for the basalt pavements in his paper, but does not concern himself further with any analysis or investigation into how they were manufactured. For this, we must turn to a couple of my favourite figures in the field of ancient engineering and manufacturing, both historical and contemporary, Flinders Petrie and Christopher Dunn. Along with the tubular drills and evidence for lathe-worked stone vessels, both topics that I've discussed at length in other videos, Flinders Petrie also discussed the evidence for circular saw use and machining of hard stone in his excellent book, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, published first in 1883. He cites several examples and collected fragments of cut basalt from the pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid. Quoting the great Sir William Flinders Petrie, quote, "The examples of saw cuts figured in plate 14 are as follows. Number 1, from the end of the Great Pyramid coffer of granite, showing where the saw cut was run too deep into the stuff twice over and back out again. Number 2, a piece of cyanide picked up at Memphis, showing cuts on 4 faces of it, and the breadth of the saw by a cut across the top of it. This probably was a waste piece from cutting out a statue in the rough. Number 3, a piece of basalt, showing a saw cut run askew and abandoned, with the sawing dust and sand left in it, a fragment from the sawing of the great basalt pavement on the east of the Great Pyramid. Number 4, another piece from the same pavement, showing regular and well-defined lines. Number 5, a slice of basalt from the same place, sawn on both sides and nearly sawn in two. Number 6, a slice of diorite bearing equidistant and regular grooves of circular arcs, parallel to one another. These grooves have been nearly polished out by cross-grinding, but still are visible. The only feasible explanation of this piece is that it was produced by a circular saw. The main examples of sawing at Giza are the blocks of the Great Basalt Pavement and the coffers of the Great, Second and Third Pyramids, the latter unhappily now lost." End quote. Petrie, both in his book and in his later letters and addresses to the Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, distinguishes the method used to make these marks on these examples against those left by grinding techniques using quartz sand or abrasives, which is the technique asserted by mainstream Egyptology today to have been the only possible method of ancient Egyptian stone cutting. Petrie states numerous times that these examples are the results of stone cutting, likely with a fixed point of an unknown material that is nonetheless much harder than the granite or basalt, and not the result of grinding. Not only that, but note Petrie's mention of a circular saw, which is definitely not something supposed to have been in the ancient Egyptians' toolbox. We'll come back around to circular saws shortly. The difference between grinding through stone and cutting it is an important point, because this is where the debate, such as it is, still lies today, some 150 years later. Engineer and precision manufacturing expert Christopher Dunn, in his excellent book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, furthered the work of Petrie with his analysis of the evidence for advanced stone cutting into basalt and granite. As you can see in this footage, the basalt pavement mentioned by Petrie is full of such examples. And although Petrie only mentions 3 of them, there are at least a dozen different blocks here with all sorts of marks still left on them. From plunge cuts where a blade has been dipped into the material and then backed out, to the striations left from multiple cuts on the sides of these blocks as their edges were shaved or worked. Most of these cut marks are from the sides of the blocks and would not normally have been visible if the pavement was intact, but as it has been left in a state of ruin over the millennium, the sides of the blocks and their markings are now visible. Most of these marks are likely the result of a multi-step process, from the roughing out of the block, the fitting and shaving of it on site, and its ultimate precision fit and polished top surface as part of the overall pavement. I say likely, as although there is much to learn and analyse from these marks, it's difficult to ever be certain as to exactly how or why they were made. Quoting Christopher Dunn, quote, "Without going back in time and talking to the pyramid,
come on,
it is
man.
impossible to explain every anomalous action that created the complex variety of evidence on the basalt pavement. Considering that the now exposed blocks that reveal these saw cuts were originally covered by adjacent blocks, it is not unreasonable to speculate that the sawed parts of the blocks were given a quick shave in order to remove irregularities that were inherent in the quarrying process and were holding one block apart from its neighbour. If we consider the overall roughness of the blocks, this quick shave was more than likely given by the only tools available on the site, and they were the tools used for finishing and cutting to size all of the blocks that went into building the pyramid. It is well known that these blocks are extremely precise in their cutting, especially those that make up the walls of the inner chambers and also the casing blocks, assuming they were all of the same exactness as the few that survived. It could be argued, therefore, that the roughing tools were not on the plateau, but were applied elsewhere." End quote.
Like, what
What
the
is
fuck?
undeniable here is that these marks, replete with striations, are the result of some form of sawing or grinding, and not the
Alright,
result
one more
of
run.
pounding stones, flint,
I'm gonna
or
sign off and
chisels,
then
which
start
are the
weightlifting
tools
stream, I
sought and
think.
quoted as the primary methods of ancient Egyptian stonework. It's here that mainstream archaeology gets itself into something of a pickle, as these marks, found not only on the basalt blocks of the pavement, but as Petrie described, also on the boxes or sarcophagi in the pyramids and on large granite slabs, have to be explained by other methods. An attempt at explaining them was made by Robert G. Morse Jr. in an article titled "Evidence for Use of a Stone-Cutting Drag Saw by the 4th Dynasty Egyptians," published in 1991 in the Journal of the American Research Center in Egypt. Although this is a firmly mainstream Egyptology attempt at explaining these marks, with Morse proposed solution of this drag saw, he had no alternative but to state that, quote, the degree of mechanization indicated by this operation is somewhat
Thanks for being
more
here. I
advanced
appreciate it
than
very much. I'm going to read somebody probably. Maybe.
technology level now hold,
Maybe.
and also
Thank you.
that the sawing done in this
Thank you so much,
process
Telling
is
Yellow
a
Jack, for the sub.
sophisticated
You're the man,
operation of
dude.
mature
Hope your
industry.
moving is going alright.
Chris Dunn
Weister.
made a thorough analysis of Moore's proposed solution,
Should we raid
and
Weister?
it is in this analysis that we can begin to see just how weak the mainstream case is for some form of relatively
not?
primitive grinding technique to explain the evidence written in the stone. First, let's describe what Moore proposed, quoting Christopher Dunn. Quote,
Is that right?
Morse proposes a blade made of copper with a notched leading edge. The blade was
WYST3R.
157 inches, 4 meters
WYST3R.
long and 23.6 inches, 60 centimeters broad, and was wedge-shaped from 0.393 inch, 1 centimeter at the top to 0.118 inches, or 3
Alright.
meters.
Thanks for being here. See you soon. Go to lift weights.
Morse estimates the weight of the blade was 308 pounds or 140 kilograms. Quartz sand was used in the process as an abrasive. It was rubbed against the basalt both as a loose medium and also by quartz sand that was embedded into the copper. This process, with fresh sand being added to the cut as used sand and sawed rock was flushed away, impressed the shape of the blade into the basalt. As we see in the figure, a team of workers dragged a blade across a block that was fixed inside a trench filled with water. The blade was suspended on ropes that were controlled by